Hey, what's up? It's cute what if? This side. Today we will be seeing what if Deku was chosen by a demon blade. Before we move ahead with the FIC, leave a like and subscribe to the channel for future what ifs like this. A 4-year-old boy shouted that All Might was amazing and that he had defeated 18 villains in no time. A blonde-haired girl replied that of course it was All Might, and he was not the #1 hero for nothing. Izuku Midoriya, excited, told them that when he grew up he wanted to be a hero like All Might and could not wait to get his quirk. He noted that Kaken had already gotten her quirk even though Izuku was older. Kaken said proudly that it was because she was better. Izuku began to cry. Kaken called him a crybaby and said he could never be a hero with that personality. Their friends complained that Kaken was being mean, and a parent called them to go home because their mothers would be worried. A few months later, Izuku's mother, Inko, worried that Izuku would soon be 5 and still did not have a quirk. She thought it was not normal and planned to take him to a quirk doctor. A week later at the doctor's office, Izuku giggled while playing with his All Might toy and wondered what quirk he would get and whether it would be as powerful as All Might's. The doctor told his mother that this would not happen and explained that Izuku had a toe joint condition that only quirkless people had. The doctor confirmed that Izuku was quirkless. That evening Izuku watched the same All Might video he had seen with Kaken over and over again and asked his mother if he could still be a hero. Inko apologized, hugged him, and tried to comfort him. 10 years passed. The years had been difficult for Izuku. His childhood friend Kaken had bullied him since the day he was told he was quirkless. Izuku did not give up. He trained hard to become stronger and began taking meticulous notes on every hero he met, cataloging their quirks, weaknesses, and strengths. During class, Izuku's teacher scolded him for daydreaming and told him to pay attention, reminding him that he was among the most intelligent in class. When the bell rang, everyone left except Kaken, some of her friends, and Izuku. Kaken walked up to Izuku, grabbed his notebook, and ridiculed his plans to be a hero. She said a boy like him could never be a hero and then used her explosion quirk to destroy his notebook and threw the ruined pages out the window, leaving the classroom with her friends. On his way home, Izuku reflected on how Kaken had changed. She had always been rude, but this was worse. She had even started calling him an insulting nickname. Izuku resolved that he would show her and everyone that even a quirkless boy could become a hero. He walked until he realized he had passed his house. Confused, he found himself in front of a dark alley he had never seen before. For reasons he could not explain, his instincts told him to enter. Inside the alley he saw a black, dirty but striking katana on the ground. He wondered why it was there and whether someone had lost it. Then a voice came from the sword. At first Izuku thought he was imagining things, but the voice made itself known again, identifying itself as the katana. Izuku was startled and shouted aloud, but the sword asked him to be quiet and promised that it would explain. Izuku asked how the sword could speak and whether weapons had quirks or were people struck by quirks. The sword said it did not have a quirk and that it had not been hit by one. It explained that it was unique, created by a being it called Satan, and that during a war between demons and angels it had been transported to another world. The sword claimed that because of it, quirks existed in Izuku's world, and that it had waited 200 years for someone who could understand it. The sword said it sensed a similar power within Izuku and asked whether he was the Satan of that world. Izuku replied that he was not and that he wanted to help people, not harm them, and that he wanted to be a hero. The sword warned that Izuku's power would allow him to help many people but that he would also kill many if he misused it. Izuku asked why the sword was telling him this. The sword said it wanted Izuku to be its new partner. It explained that Izuku was the only one who could understand it and that the sleeping power inside him could be awakened with the sword's help. The sword offered to help him accomplish his dreams if he accepted. Izuku, surprised and hesitant because he felt weak, accepted the partnership. The sword told him to stop underestimating himself, saying that once he learned to use his power no one would be able to stop him. Izuku introduced himself as Midoriya Izuku and said it was nice to meet his new partner. The sword introduced itself as Greed and returned the greeting. Time passed. Greed and Izuku trained together. At one point Greed complained about being left lying on the ground, and Izuku apologized and helped the sword up. Greed teased that Izuku looked frail but was able to lift it and suggested they had less training to do. Greed offered to train Izuku to release the power inside him and insisted that he was a good teacher. Izuku, eager, asked when they would start. The next morning, after returning home and announcing his arrival, Izuku asked when training would begin. Greed chose 6 in the morning and asked if Izuku knew a quiet place to train. Izuku said he did. Greed then said they needed to make a contract so Izuku could use the sword's full potential and warned that distance between them would cause Izuku pain. Izuku asked how the contract would work. Greed said it was simple and that he needed some of Izuku's blood. He instructed that only a few drops of blood should fall on him and that the narrator should repeat his words. The narrator nodded and complied. A black and red circle appeared on the ground and a black tattoo in the shape of a dragon grew and shifted across the narrator's chest and back. When the circle faded, the narrator reacted with shock and confusion. Greed explained that the mark was the sign of a contract with him and that the dragon tattoo would disappear once the contract was broken. The narrator admitted that it looked cool. Greed responded proudly. Exhausted after the ritual, the narrator fell asleep without noticing. The next morning the narrator woke at 5 a.m. and prepared for training with Greed, dressing in shorts and a top. After a quick breakfast, the narrator and Greed went to an abandoned beach, once beautiful but now polluted by illegal dumping. Greed said that the place was perfect for training and asked to see how much the narrator had developed physically, requesting that the narrator remove the shirt to assess the progress. The narrator complied. Greed commented that the narrator was more muscular than expected. The narrator asked how Greed could perceive the world without eyes. Greed explained that he sensed natural ki, which allowed him to see, hear, smell, and touch. The narrator asked what ki was exactly. Greed said he had planned to teach it later but decided to explain now. He described ki as a latent energy in every human that is usually weak and hard to control. Only a very small fraction, he said, about 0.000025%, roughly 175,000 people, could fully master it. The more powerful the ki, the harder it was to control. Greed outlined 3 types of ki. The first he called observation ki. It allowed the user to sense everything and read an opponent's movements, and in perfect control could even anticipate a few seconds into the future. The second he called power-up ki. It allowed the user to boost physical capabilities like speed, strength, and defense, but it was the most dangerous to use because a mistake could cause a loss of consciousness or worse. The third he called King's Ki. It was the rarest and most powerful. Greed admitted that even he did not possess it and that it belonged only to the most powerful humans, though its full capabilities were unknown due to its rarity. When Greed finished explaining, the narrator said they understood. Greed then instructed the narrator to clean the entire beach to build more muscle, despite already being muscular. The narrator agreed and began cleaning. After 4 months of work and training, the narrator had finished cleaning the beach. Greed began formal sword training and was surprised by how quickly the narrator learned. After 3 months of training, the narrator handled the sword like a professional. Months later at school, the narrator looked out the classroom window as usual. The teacher announced that they would distribute forms and asked the students to write down the school they wanted to apply to, assuming most wanted to become heroes. Everyone in the class demonstrated their quirks as usual except for Bakugo and the narrator. Bakugo declared his intent to be the first student from that school to enter UA and insisted he would be number 1. Other students commented that UA was the best hero school in Japan with a very low acceptance rate and suggested that Katsumi, with her quirk, would likely be accepted and could rise to the top of the hero ranks. Bakugo insisted once more that he would be number 1. Katsuki Bakugo exploded across the classroom, demanding who had given Izuku the right to use his first name. The teacher replied that Midoriya also wanted to attend UA. A pause fell over the room before everyone started laughing at the exchange. Bakugo continued, loudly declaring that a quirkless Deku could never do anything and that only elites like him belonged at UA, warning that Izuku would be finished by the first challenge that came his way. Izuku responded calmly that no one had said quirkless people would never be accepted. The teacher ordered Bakugo to return to his desk, and Bakugo snorted in irritation. After class, Walking home, Izuku resolved to prove Bakugo wrong and to go to UA and become a hero like All Might. He did not notice a slime-like villain appear behind him until it was too late. The slime villain moved to possess Izuku, claiming it would only hurt for a moment and that it intended to take his form. Before the villain could fully act, Izuku drew Greed from his backpack. Greed sliced through the slime, separating it into harmless blobs in a quick, precise motion, and Izuku trapped the pieces in a water bottle. Greed noted its own surprising capability to cut through such a creature, and Izuku admitted there were still many things he did not know about the sentient item. At that moment All Might appeared, asking if the boy was all right and whether he had defeated the villain. Izuku showed All Might the bottled slime and explained briefly that he had handled it. All Might checked on the boy, but his time was limited. His energy suddenly shifted and his heroic, larger-than-life form faded. He revealed his true, frail appearance beneath his shirt and explained quietly that he had been badly injured in a battle years before. Those injuries had left lasting consequences. He warned Izuku not to tell anyone and apologized for having so little time. Izuku promised to keep his secret and said All Might was the symbol of peace whose support could not be lost. All Might smiled with relief and departed, leaving a determined Izuku behind. 6 months passed after that meeting. Izuku trained under Greed to sense and release his ki. It took 3 months to learn to release it and another 3 months to control it. The training had been grueling. With the UA entrance exam 1 month away, Izuku felt cautiously optimistic about the written portion and the practical test. Greed advised him to rest that month to avoid overworking his body. 1 month later, the night before the exam, Izuku walked along the beach to calm his nerves. Greed complimented how beautiful the beach looked and noted how many people were present. Izuku admitted he felt nervous and wondered if a quirkless person like him could be accepted. Greed encouraged him, saying that with his abilities many would mistake him for someone with a super strength quirk. They headed home as the sky darkened. The next morning at UA, Izuku was awed by the size of the campus, describing it as larger than he had imagined. Other students echoed their impressions and praised the school as the best hero academy in Japan. As they entered, Izuku caught a girl who had tripped before she hit the ground. He asked if she was all right, and she thanked him, then apologized for activating her quirk without warning and introduced herself as Ochako Uraraka. Izuku introduced himself as Izuku Midoriya and the two proceeded to the written exam. Izuku finished the test in 30 minutes and waited for the others to complete theirs. About an hour later, everyone had finished the written portion and the group was led into an enormous hall where pro-hero Present Mike was waiting. Present Mike called for attention and began explaining the rules for the next phase of the entrance exam. Present Mike explained the booklet, saying there were 4 simulated villain robots with different point values, one worth 1 point, one worth 2 points, and one worth 3 points. A blue-haired participant raised his hand and asked about a discrepancy on the sheet. Present Mike answered that there was a 4th robot but it was worth 0 points and functioned more as an obstacle, so it was better to avoid it. Later, everyone waited for the practice exam to begin. Izuku noticed Uraraka and intended to wish her good luck, but a blue-haired participant interrupted her concentration. Present Mike then announced that the exam was starting. The other students took off running while Izuku followed. He encountered 3 2-point robots and destroyed them easily without needing to call on Greed. He commented to himself that even though their casing looked resistant, they were manageable. A little later he met 6 1-point robots and 2 3-point robots. The 3-pointers were tougher but still no problem. After a few minutes he had accumulated 67 points, and Present Mike warned over the loudspeaker that only 2 minutes remained. In the monitor room, several pro-heroes watched the exam. One observer remarked that they would have a lot of talented students this year. Midnight agreed and said the students were strong, but they would have to see whether they were truly heroic in their actions. Another observer noted that the blonde girl had a powerful quirk and quick reflexes. Midnight pointed out that the handsome green-haired boy looked promising, and Eraserhead, half asleep in his yellow sleeping bag, grumbled that he did not care for the noise and asked Principal Nizu to intervene. Principal Nizu agreed and pressed a red button. On the training ground, Izuku felt the earth shake and saw participants fleeing in panic as a massive 0-point robot appeared and began crushing a building. A voice farther away shouted for people to run if they did not want to be hurt. Izuku then heard a scream and recognized Uraraka. She was trapped beneath twisted metal. He ran toward the giant robot and launched himself high into the air, shattering the ground in an explosive jump and disappearing in a streak. Reaching the robot, he drew greed and channeled his energy through the blade, then sliced the machine cleanly in two in a burst of dramatic, anime-style action that sent rubble scattering and damaged nearby structures without any graphic detail. Everyone on the field stared in stunned silence as Izuku landed. Present Mike immediately declared the exercise over. Recovery Girl moved through the crowd to tend to injured students, healing what she could and handing out candies to help steady nerves. Izuku rushed to Uraraka, who was shocked and worried that her ankle might be broken. He lifted her and carried her to Recovery Girl. She quickly mended Uraraka's ankle and offered some sweets. Back home that evening, Izuku's mother greeted him and asked how the exam had gone. Izuku told her that he had done well in both the written and practical portions. His mother smiled and said she would make his favorite pork cutlet bowl for dinner. Izuku offered to help, but his mother told him to rest instead, saying he must be tired after the test. He kissed her on the cheek, then went to his room and set Greed beside his bed before taking a shower. Afterward, as he lay on his bed, Greed warned anxiously that the power Izuku had used against the zero-pointer did not come from the blade and sounded dangerous. Greed urged him not to use it again. Izuku agreed. When dinner was ready, Izuku joined his mother at the table and enjoyed the meal. A week later, Izuku's mother burst into his room in a panic and handed him an acceptance letter from UA High School. He opened it and a small hologram of All Might projected from the paper. All Might laughed and explained that he would be joining UA as a teacher. He announced that Izuku had scored 97% on the written exam and had earned 79 villain points in the practical. By rescuing Uraraka, Izuku had earned 60 rescue points, bringing his total to 139 points, breaking the school record and securing his place at UA. The hologram terminated for security reasons. Izuku ran through the house, shouting the news to his mother. On the first day of school, Izuku's mother told him he looked great before he left. Once on campus, he felt overwhelmed by how large everything was and spent a frantic 15 minutes searching for room 1A. When he finally found the classroom, he wondered who his new classmates would be and hoped that Kakin and that odd boy were not in the same class as him. As I pondered, shouting came from the classroom, and someone muttered that it solved one mystery. I felt a sweat drop at the thought, opened the door and walked in. Ida Tenya immediately admonished Bakugo for putting his feet on the table, telling him to show respect for those who had used the table before and for the craftsmen who made it. Ida added that such behavior was unbecoming of a hero and especially unbecoming for a young woman to encourage. Bakugo snapped back that he had no right to be ordered around by someone he saw as an extra. Ida introduced himself properly, stating his name as Ida Tenya and explaining that he was from semi-private school. Bakugo scoffed at the name and declared that he still had reason to make Ida regret it. I moved toward an empty seat, but Ida noticed me and crossed the room. He apologized for what he had said earlier to me and conceded, with a series of formal gestures, that I had shown a better grasp of the practical part of the exam. Before I could respond, someone leapt onto me and hugged me tightly. Uraraka expressed relief that I had made it in and praised me for how well I had handled destroying the zero-pointer. Katsumi, watching, seethed at my presence in the classroom and at the fact I wore the UA uniform. She thought it impossible that I had been accepted on talent alone and jumped to the conclusion that I must have a connection to a pro hero, which explained how I got in. She wanted to confront me, but she was interrupted. A sleepy voice called out, telling the class that if anyone was there to make friends they could leave. The whole room turned toward a yellow sleeping bag wriggling like a worm. The person inside turned, stood up, and revealed a tired man with scruffy black hair at neck length who looked like he had not had proper sleep for days. Aizawa Shota noted that it had taken 8 seconds to quiet down and said they had to fix the situation. He introduced himself as their homeroom teacher and directed everyone to put on physical education uniforms and meet him at the training field, then got back into his sleeping bag. Everyone took a P uniform and went to the changing rooms. On the way, Classmates exchanged looks and quiet murmurs about the new arrivals and the tense exchanges they had witnessed. The mood had shifted from chaotic to focused. At the training field, Aizawa observed that everyone had arrived and prepared to begin. Aizawa entered the classroom and announced that they would begin the quirk assessment test. Several students reacted with confusion, and Uraraka asked if they would miss the orientation ceremony. Aizawa explained that they were here to become heroes and that, as a member of the staff, he was free to do whatever was necessary to get the best results from the new generation. Aizawa called Katsumi Bakugo forward and handed her a ball, asking how far she had thrown in middle school. He then instructed her to use her quirk while remaining inside the circle. Katsumi warmed up, shouted fiercely, and launched the ball with explosive force. Izuku noted her shout with unease as Aizawa checked his phone and revealed the distance, 705.3 meters. Katsumi smirked and glanced at Izuku. A pink-haired classmate commented that it would be fun, and Aizawa announced that the student who finished last would be expelled. The room fell silent. Katsumi privately thought that Izuku would be the one expelled. Ida went next, activated his engine quirk, and kicked the ball, sending it 345 meters. After several other students had their turns, it was Izuku's turn. He hesitated over whether to use greed, the sword's power, but decided not to risk damaging the ball. He took a deep breath and threw with such force that some students were knocked off their feet. Aizawa checked the phone again and displayed Izuku's result, 705.2 meters. Before Izuku could steady himself, Katsumi loudly accused him of hiding a quirk. Aizawa restrained the disturbance by quickly wrapping Katsumi in his capture bandages and activating his ability to nullify quirks. Katsumi demanded to know why she could not use her power. Aizawa explained calmly that his quirk could erase other quirks temporarily except those of mutants, and admonished everyone not to waste time. Later, Aizawa presented the assessment rankings. He announced that Yaoyorozu Momo had come in first, Todoroki Shoko second, Midoriya Izuku third, and Katsumi Bakugo fourth. The list continued down to Mineta Minoru in 20th place. Mineta reacted awkwardly in front of the class, and the other students met his outburst with scorn. Aizawa revealed that the expulsion threat had been a test to push them to give their all and told them to return to class. Many students protested, but the announcement stood and they dispersed to the changing rooms. In private afterwards, All Might and Aizawa compared notes about the class. All Might remarked that last year Aizawa had expelled a whole class for lacking potential, and Aizawa agreed but added that this year's students seemed more capable, especially Midoriya Izuku. Aizawa said he had tried to erase Midoriya's quirk and found it resisted him, so he did not believe Midoriya's ability was simple super strength. He mentioned that Midoriya had used his sword during the exam and managed to cut something impossible for an ordinary blade, which suggested there was more to investigate. All Might shared Aizawa's concern and agreed they would look into it. The roster of students read like this: Yaoyorozu Momo, female, age 15, 1.73 m tall, long black hair, black eyes, quirk, creation. She enjoyed reading, especially illustrated encyclopedias. Todoroki Shoko, female, age 15, 1.71 m tall, long hair split white and red, one gray eye and one blue eye, quirk, half ice and half fire. She liked soba noodles and had a strained relationship with her father. Kirishima Ejiro, male, age 15, 1.74 m tall, hair dyed red, red eyes, quirk, hardening. He admired resilient, straightforward people. Mineta Minoru, male, age 15, short stature, distinctive sticky hair quirk. He was often fixated on romantic interests. Ashido Mina, female, age 15, 1.59 m tall, short curly pink hair with small horn-like protrusions, yellow and black eyes, pink skin, quirk, acid. She enjoyed romantic stories. Ida Tenya, male, age 15, 1.79 m tall, blue hair and eyes, wore glasses, quirk, engine. He valued rules and cared for his family. Azuityu, female, age 15, 1.50 m tall, long green hair and large green eyes, quirk, frog. She looked after younger siblings. Hagakure Turu, female, age 15, 1.52 m tall, quirk, invisibility. Jiro Kyoka, female, age 15, 1.54 m tall, purple shoulder-length hair, dark purple eyes. Quirk, earphone jack. She loved music. Fumikage Tokoyami, male, age 15, 1.58 m tall, with a bird-like visage and dark eyes. Quirk, dark shadow. He preferred darkness and silence. Kaminari Denki, male, age 15, 1.68 m tall, blonde hair with a black lightning pattern, yellow eyes. Quirk, electricity. Aoyama Yuga, male, age 15, 1.69 m tall, blonde hair, purple eyes. Quirk, naval laser. He took pride in his appearance. Ojiro Mashireo, male, age 15, 1.69 m tall, blonde hair, black eyes. Quirk, tail. He practiced martial arts. Siro Hanta, male, age 15, 1.77 m tall, black hair and eyes. Quirk, tape. After the assessment, the week passed quickly. When class resumed and Aizawa entered, a different energy swept the room as All Might arrived in his Silver Age costume. He announced his presence boldly and the students erupted with excitement, many exclaiming that they could not believe All Might would be teaching them. All Might declared that from that day on he would be one of their teachers and that they would begin with battle training. He emphasized that a hero needed a proper costume and activated a remote to open compartments in the classroom walls, revealing suitcases labeled by seat number. The students excitedly gathered their cases and went to the changing rooms. Later, at ground beta, nearly everyone had finished dressing. Izuku made a final check of his equipment when Uraraka waved and called out a nickname she had heard earlier. Izuku explained that he had heard Bakugo call him that during the assessment and that it had sounded insulting, but Uraraka admitted she thought the nickname was cute and had associated it with the phrase, "You can do it," which gave her motivation. Izuku accepted the nickname with a hesitant smile and Uraraka complimented his costume. She mentioned it looked tight on her, and Izuku reciprocated her compliment, noting that it matched his sword. Uraraka asked why he always carried a sword. Greed, the sword, sent a telepathic suggestion that Izuku should say it was very important to him. Izuku relayed that the katana had been given to him by his father before his father went missing. He felt uneasy about stretching the truth but presented the explanation anyway. All Might explain the exercise rules. The class would be split into hero teams and villain teams. The villains would hide a fake bomb in the building and the heroes would have a limited time to find it. The villains would win if they captured all the heroes or protected the bomb, and the heroes would win if they captured all the villains or touched the fake bomb. All Might then asked if anyone had questions. Ashido asked whether someone would be expelled. Katsumi shouted excitedly and asked whether they could explode their opponents. Aoyama asked if his costume looked good. Ida asked how opponents would be chosen. All Might replied that he was not expelling anyone, they could not blow their opponents up, Aoyama's costume looked fine, and partners would be selected by lottery. The teams were announced. Team A consisted of Uraraka and Izuku. Team B was Todoroki and Shoji. Team C was Yaoyorozu and Mineta. Team D was Katsumi and Ida. Team E was Ashido and Aoyama. Team F was Sato and Kuda. Team G was Kaminari and Jiro. Team H was Tokoyami and Azui. Team I was Hagakure and Ojiro. Team J was Siro and Kirishima. All Might assign Team A versus Team D, with Team A as the heroes and Team D as the villains. He told the villains they had 5 minutes to prepare. Izuku felt as if someone was watching him and turned slowly to see Kaken smiling with an unmistakable grin. Izuku muttered under his breath and cursed at the thought of facing her. Later, Uraraka used her quirk to lift Izuku and asked if he was sure the plan would work as she pushed him toward the window. Izuku said he was confident, and she agreed to trust him. They moved around the building searching for the bomb when a figure appeared before them. Izuku quickly turned and pushed Uraraka away to safety. Katsumi recognized him and commented on his dodging. She then ran toward Izuku to strike, but he grabbed her arm and threw her over his shoulder, reluctant to hurt a woman but prepared to act. Katsumi stared in shock and wondered if he had just read her moves. Izuku reminded himself internally that Kaken always favored that right hook, and he had learned to anticipate it. He told himself that he was no longer anyone's punching bag and affirmed that he had changed, that he was the Deku who always gave his best. Elsewhere, Ida wondered why Bakugo had run off on her own and what she could possibly have been thinking. Back on the field, Katsumi shouted that he had set her off. Izuku told Uraraka to run ahead, and she ran in the opposite direction. Katsumi ordered him to worry about himself and charged. She attempted a kick, but Izuku managed to block and wrapped capture tape around her foot. Izuku considered what would come next based on her personality and predicted her next move, dodging before she could land another blow. In the monitoring room, Sato remarked that Izuku was amazing, going toe-to-toe with Katsumi without using his quirk. The others did not know that Izuku was quirkless and that he was holding back. Katsumi berated him inwardly, convinced he was useless and resentful that he could dodge her attacks without a scratch. Uraraka, hidden nearby, thought she needed to remain out of sight until Izuku showed up. Ida decided that Bakugo's tendency toward troublemaking suited the exercise, and although he felt it brought some shame to his family name, he resolved that playing a villain in training would help him become a better man. He adopted an exaggerated villainous expression for effect and declared himself the ultimate evil in mock drama. Izuku could not help but laugh quietly at the display. Ida noticed Izuku and announced proudly that he knew Izuku's quirk allowed him to levitate objects he touched, so he had removed every object on the floor as a counter-strategy. He taunted that Izuku's tricks would not work this time. Izuku's phone rang. Uraraka reported that Ida had found her and apologized. Izuku asked where she was and told her he was heading there as fast as possible. Uraraka said she was on the 5th floor, in the center, directly above him. Izuku felt the pressure of time and told himself they had to hurry. Katsumi informed her teammate that she was loaded and ready. She explained that her sweat glands secreted a volatile fluid similar to nitroglycerin and that her gauntlet had been storing that fluid to produce powerful explosions. In the monitor room, All Might reacted in alarm and ordered Bakugo to stop, fearing someone could be killed. Katsumi insisted she did not intend to kill anyone. As Bakugo shouted a challenge, Izuku suddenly envisioned a massive explosion racing toward him. The vision showed him thrown back and the surrounding structure badly damaged. He briefly saw a vision of himself among ruined debris, scorched by the blast. Someone nearby reassured him that the vision had been caused by his unintentional use of his observation ability. He understood then that he had predicted the blast. Bakugo stripped a component from Katsumi's gauntlet to attempt to trigger the explosion, but before it could detonate on him, Izuku leapt onto a fragment of flying rock and used it to propel himself toward Bakugo. He wrapped his capture tape around Bakugo and restrained him. All Might announced over the comms that Bakugo had been captured as the smoke cleared. Bakugo sat stunned, asking when it had happened. Izuku explained that it was right after Bakugo released his explosion. Bakugo was shocked that Izuku had not been burned. Izuku said he had predicted the blast and then ran to the 5th floor while Bakugo remained bewildered. In the monitor room, All Might mulled over what he had just seen, wondering if Izuku's prediction had really come from his observation ability and whether that implied knowledge of a deeper power. Other students watching the monitors reacted enthusiastically. Kirishima praised Izuku for being brave. Ashido admitted she had missed the details. Tokoyami observed that Izuku had performed better than expected. Todoroki analyzed the sequence, explaining that Izuku had jumped, used debris to propel himself away from the explosion, and then seized the opportunity to capture Bakugo with a well-timed maneuver. Everyone agreed that it had been an impressive, complex move. Izuku reached the 5th floor and found Uraraka floating as she directed herself toward a bomb and released her quirk to control her fall onto it. Before she could reach it, Ida used his quirk to remove the bomb from the immediate area. Izuku hid and waited for an opening. Ida and Uraraka repeated their coordinated movements until Uraraka noticed Izuku. Quietly, without Ida realizing, she maneuvered the bomb so that it would be right where Izuku could reach it. When the device was positioned just so, Izuku ran forward and touched the bomb to secure it. The hero team claimed victory. Ida expressed surprise at Izuku's presence, and Izuku replied that he had been there for a while. Ida admitted he had not noticed. The remainder of the training battles proceeded without serious injuries to any students. The next day, a crowd of reporters gathered outside the UA gate and questioned students about All Might. A journalist asked Izuku what it was like to learn from All Might. Izuku smiled and said that All Might was an excellent teacher who had taught them much about heroism and combat, and that he had grown a great deal under his instruction. When asked later what the symbol of peace looked like, Uraraka mimicked All Might's posture and described his heroic image with playful admiration. Reporters tried to speak with Katsumi, but Aizawa cut them off and ushered them away. The reporters followed until they were outside the gate, and then the gate was secured. At a later class meeting, Aizawa reviewed the students' recent training and evaluations. He admonished Bakugo to mature and stop wasting his talent. He then announced that the class would elect a class president. Ida proposed that if the class was to choose a leader democratically, that person should earn the trust of their peers. He argued that an election would identify who could truly lead. Tsuyu countered that they had not known each other long enough to build that trust, and Kirishima noted that everyone might simply vote for themselves. Ida countered that multiple votes for someone would indicate genuine support. Aizawa allowed the election and told them to keep it brief. When the votes were tallied, Izuku discovered that he had received 6 votes. Bakugo demanded to know who had voted for him, and some students reacted with surprise and curiosity. Ida remarked on the harsh reality of leadership politics with a tremor of disbelief. Momo asked if others had voted for someone different, and the students confirmed they had. The class settled on Izuku as president and Momo as vice president. At lunch, students asked to sit with the new class leaders. Kirishima expressed admiration at Izuku's 6 votes and encouraged him. Izuku confessed he was unsure whether he was truly fit to lead, and Uraraka reassured him that his determination and decisive actions in critical moments made him well suited to guide them. Ida explained that he had voted for Izuku for those reasons. Ashido and Uraraka also said they had voted for him, sharing their support. Kirishima noted that he was in our class. Sato added that she was too. Momo said she was as well. Midoriya expressed surprise that Momo included him. Momo explained that with his analyses and intelligence he could lead them all. Midoriya admitted he felt flustered that the most intelligent girl in their class thought so highly of him and that he had voted for her for the same reasons. Ashido remarked with a mischievous smile that he had voted for Momo, and Momo blushed. Uraraka asked Ida if she could ask him a question. Ida agreed. Uraraka asked if Ida came from a wealthy family because of the way he spoke. Ida said he preferred to keep it private but that he came from a renowned hero family and was the second son, mentioning the hero Ingenium. Midoriya recalled that Ingenium employed many sidekicks in Tokyo, and Ida proudly confirmed that Ingenium was his brother. Ashido commented on Ida's frankness. Ida spoke about his brother's adherence to rules and how his admiration had inspired his own desire to become a hero, though he admitted he was not yet ready to lead anyone and thought the role should go to Midoriya. A sudden alarm interrupted him. The public address announced that security level 3 had been breached and all students were to evacuate in an orderly fashion. An older student explained that someone had infiltrated the building, something that had not happened in his 3 years there, and urged everyone to leave quickly. People began pushing and shoving. Uraraka asked what was happening. Ida loudly urged everyone to calm down, trying to steady the panic. Midoriya noted that the response seemed excessive as he was pulled away from Ida and the others and dragged toward a window. He saw Todoroki trip and caught her before she hit the ground. Todoroki answered Midoriya in a flat voice that she was all right. Students were crowded near the window, and Midoriya saw the press corps gathering outside. He asked Todoroki if it was the press, and she checked before nodding. Midoriya called for calm and asked Todoroki to lift him with her ice so he could address everyone. She did as he asked, and he took a deep breath and spoke loudly, urging everyone to calm down and explaining that it was only the press and there was nothing to panic about. He reminded them to behave in a way befitting their school, to walk in silence, and to wait until the situation calmed down. Many students were startled by his deep voice at first, but they soon relaxed. A few days later, back in the classroom, Kirishima praised Midoriya's composure and called his actions manly. Ida said he had been right to predict Midoriya would be a great leader, and Todoroki admitted it had been leadership-worthy. Midoriya thanked them. Outside before the gate, Recovery Girl observed that no ordinary reporter could have caused the commotion. She suggested someone had instigated the affair. Principal Nizu wondered whether someone had managed to get inside the facility or if this was a sign of a larger threat. 3 days later, Aizawa announced that basic hero training that day would be supervised by All Might, Aizawa himself, and another hero. The students noted that it seemed a special class. Shiro asked what they would be doing, and Aizawa explained it would be disaster relief training, covering everything from fires to floods. Kaminari groaned at the prospect of a rough day. Ishido and Kirishima expressed excitement about doing the kind of work real heroes did. Aizawa added that students could choose whether to wear their costumes since some outfits were unsuitable for this activity and told them they would be going by bus to a remote training site. On the bus, Tsuyu Azui told Midoriya to call her Tsuyu and asked why he carried a sword on his back when he rarely used it. Midoriya explained that it boosted his abilities and was kept for emergencies. Kirishima commented that it sounded like a good combination with Midoriya's strength. Midoriya admitted he did not have a quirk, feeling a bit embarrassed. Kaminari reacted with disbelief, unable to imagine such strength without a quirk. Aizawa clarified that during the quirk assessment they had been unable to detect or remove any quirk in Midoriya, which had surprised everyone. Sato remarked that Midoriya's force was impressive. Midoriya said he had trained hard since childhood and scratched his head at the compliment. Shiro suggested that with enough training others might reach similar strength. Midoriya tried to steer the conversation and noted that there were already powerful classmates like Todoroki and Bakugo. Bakugo reacted sharply to a teasing comment, and Azui calmly observed the exchange. Kaminari commented on how quickly social tensions were appearing among them. The banter escalated briefly until someone mocked Bakugo with a nickname, which made Midoriya laugh and the others follow his lead. Aizawa told them to be sharp as they arrived. When they reached the training site at Universal Studios Japan, Hagakure exclaimed at the scale of the park. Sato pointed out various disaster zones: flood area, landslide zone, fire zone, and more. A hero emerged from the facility and introduced himself as Space Hero 13, a gentleman hero who specialized in rescue scenarios. Uraraka expressed admiration for him. Aizawa asked quietly where All Might was. 13 explained that All Might had reached his limit during his morning commute and indicated the situation with a hand gesture. Midoriya inferred that All Might could not attend. Aizawa began to outline the training and said he had several points to cover. 13 introduced his quirk, Black Hole, and described its ability to absorb and tear things apart. Midoriya asked if he had used it in rescue operations, and 13 confirmed that he had, but warned that his power could be lethal if misused. He emphasized that in a society filled with quirks, powers were heavily regulated and monitored, and that it took only one wrong move with an uncontrollable quirk for people to be hurt. 13 reminded the students that through previous tests and training they had glimpsed both their potential and the danger their abilities could pose. He explained that this class would offer a new perspective on using their quirks safely and effectively in rescue situations. 13 explained that their mission was to save lives and nothing more. Ida clapped his hands and loudly praised the statement. Aizawa's words were cut off when a strange dark portal opened nearby. Aizawa ordered everyone to huddle up and not move, then instructed 13 to protect the students. One student noted that the intruding presence looked like villains. Another student compared them to the battle robots from the entrance exam, but a different voice warned that these were real villains. Aizawa blamed the group of attackers for the earlier incident and demanded to know where All Might was. One of the villains asked if All Might was present and mused callously about whether desperate measures would attract him. It became clear to everyone watching that what the pros were facing on the field was evil unleashed. A blue-haired villain remarked that All Might was not there and wondered if something would force him to appear. Kirishima expressed disbelief that villains would be dumb enough to sneak into a school for heroes. Momo asked whether the intruder sensors were active. Aizawa confirmed that there were sensors and suggested that if they were failing, it was likely due to a quirk-based interference. Todoroki pointed out that this place was far from the main campus and had been chosen at a time when few people would be present, indicating the attack was well coordinated and had a specific objective. Aizawa ordered 13 to begin evacuation and to try calling the school. He said that one of the villains was likely jamming the sensors and asked Kaminari to try using his quirk to signal for help. Kaminari acknowledged the order, and Aizawa moved to confront the intruders. The villains organized themselves into a ranged squad and lamented that their intel had only mentioned 13 and All Might. They did not expect the number of opponents before them. One of them noted that a lone figure was approaching them, dismissing him as a foolish target to test. When they tried to use their quirks, nothing happened. One villain reported that he could not fire. Aizawa wrapped his capture rope around several of the villains and pulled them together. One of the attackers realized with alarm that Aizawa could cancel quirks simply by looking at opponents. They recognized him as Eraserhead. Another villain tried to test whether that ability would work against different types of quirks, but Aizawa moved quickly and struck him. He explained through his actions that his quirk neutralized operative and transformative types, but that close-quarters fighters often tried to gain advantage in hand-to-hand combat. Anticipating that, Aizawa revealed countermeasures, maintaining control of the rope to restrain and slam the attacker to the ground. From the sidelines, members of the opposing group observed that Aizawa excelled at hand-to-hand combat and that his goggles concealed his eyes, making it impossible to tell whose quirks he might be canceling. The scene remained tense as teams worked to secure the area and protect the students while backup signals were attempted and the evacuation proceeded. The villain with blue hair and the many hands around his body announced that even a whole mob was not slowing him down. Kaminari noted that the opponent could hold his own despite being outnumbered. Ida insisted that there was no time for observation and ordered an evacuation. A purple mist interjected that it would not allow that to happen. Aizawa thought that in the blink of an eye the enemy had revealed himself as the deadliest one there. The mist introduced its group as the League of Villains and declared that they had come to UA High School to end the life of All Might, the symbol of peace. The mist explained that it had expected All Might to be present but that his schedule must have changed. Regardless, its role would not change. Kirishima and Katsumi charged at the mist. Katsumi intended to stop the mist first, and Kirishima remarked that the attack had been unexpected. The mist praised the students for their skill but then warned them back. 13 attempted to order everyone to fall back, but the mist enveloped the students and sent them to different zones throughout the facility. Izuku fell from the sky into water and realized they had been teleported. He suspected it was the villain's quirk and feared their goal was to kill All Might. As a villain moved to strike him, Tsuyu intervened, using her tongue to pull him into a bout. Tsuyu then propelled Mineta into the craft. Tsuyu acknowledged that they were in trouble. Izuku observed that the villains had known UA's schedule and suspected they had engineered the recent media commotion to gather intelligence. He remembered Todoroki's earlier warning and felt anger at the villains' preparation. Mineta loudly insisted that All Might could not be killed and that the symbol of peace would defeat any assailant once he arrived. Izuku warned Mineta to stop shouting because the villains could overhear. He feared that the villains had found a way to defeat All Might, otherwise they would not have come just to be beaten. Izuku examined the possibility that the villains had a specific reason to target All Might beyond his role as a symbol. Izuku resolved that if there was any chance the villains had a method to beat All Might, the students had to fight to win. All Might struggled to contact 13 and Aizawa and admitted privately that he had put his hero duties ahead of his teaching that day, a choice he now questioned. Principal Nizu interrupted with a tablet showing headlines celebrating All Might's recent heroics. Nizu reminded him that his injury limited his abilities and that, while All Might had accepted the teaching position to help keep his condition private, he should still try to prioritize his role as an instructor occasionally. All Might had been preparing to respond to the incident at USJ, and Nizu tried to persuade him to relax by sharing tea and thoughts on education, but All Might remained determined to go. Back at the USJ entrance, Ida demanded to know where the others were. Shoji explained that the students had been scattered but remained inside the facility. Ciro reported that physical attacks had been ineffective because the enemy could wrap or dodge them. The foe's quirk was proving difficult to handle. 13 confirmed that Ida's speed quirk was among the fastest present and ordered Ida to return to the school to report the situation, explaining that professional heroes would respond and increase their chances. Ida hesitated at the thought of leaving his classmates, but 13 argued that reporting the attack did not abandon them and that the group would create an opening. The mist mocked the strategy, but 13 activated his quirk and prepared to make room for Ida to leave. In the flood zone, Izuku listened as Mineta shouted that hiding and waiting for rescue was their only hope. Izuku pointed out that the villains seemed well suited to aquatic combat. Tsuyu agreed. Together they reasoned that the ringleaders must have recruited their team with knowledge of USJ's varied environments. At the same time, the villains had made a critical mistake. They had dumped Tsuyu into the flood zone despite not knowing her quirk, which would have made more sense only if they were unaware of the student's abilities. Tsuyu's placement supported Izuku's theory that the villains did not know their quirks and had relied on scattering and overwhelming numbers instead. Tsuyu calmly summarized her abilities, explaining her capacity to jump high, stick to surfaces, and extend her tongue to great lengths. She noted a few other unpleasant but less useful traits and then dismissed them. Mineta produced one of his sticky spheres and showed how it adhered to a wall. He explained that the spheres could remain sticky for a long time and that new ones would regrow, but taking too many caused discomfort. When Mineta grew upset and tearful over his perceived uselessness, Izuku offered comfort and insisted that Mineta's quirk could be valuable if they thought creatively. A villain then struck the boat with a precise, forceful blow that split it cleanly in two, sending the small craft apart without inflicting any graphic harm. The students reacted quickly and braced themselves as the villain prepared to strike again. Villain 5 ordered them to finish the job. Tsuyu observed that the strike had been so strong it split the boat in two. Mineta panicked and flailed, sending his hair into the water. Tsuyu scolded him, pointing out that the enemy now knew his quirk. One of the villains replied that their forces were on guard and would not touch them. Villain 6 warned that the boat would go under in less than a minute and that anyone in the water would be easy prey. Mineta screamed in alarm. Mineta's nervous rambling followed, and a villain mocked them as a bunch of babies. Another villain reminded his allies that Shigaraki had warned them not to be careless. Age did not matter, only quirks, and the villains clearly had the advantage in the water. Midoriya realized he was useless in the current situation. The only way he could fight effectively would be if the opponents came onto the boat, which seemed unlikely. He thought that the only person who could really help was Tsuyu. He hesitated, knowing that using greed now risked hurting Mineta and Tsuyu, and cursed under his breath. Greed asked if Midoriya was sure. Midoriya affirmed that he was. Greed explained that he still could not reduce Midoriya's overall power, but that being a sword was not his only function. Greed asked for a portion of Midoriya's blood to perform the transformation. Midoriya agreed and told Greed to take whatever was needed. He braced himself despite the warning that it would hurt. The dragon-shaped mark on Midoriya's chest began to move down his right arm and into Greed. Veins tightened and a raw, searing pain rolled through him. Tsuyu screamed in alarm at the sight of Midoriya's arm darkening. Midoriya assured her he would be all right and that the pain would end soon. Mineta shook and voiced his relief when the worst passed. Greed warned Midoriya that the transformation might be painful, then released a white light and reshaped into a bow. Midoriya, still cautious but determined, jumped out of the boat, took the bow, drew the string, concentrated a small amount of ki in a single point and released it. Black arrows formed and shot toward the villains. The arrows, made of ki, tracked their targets and struck them all, though they were not overwhelmingly powerful. Midoriya noted the arrow's chasing property, and Greed observed that he could transform into different weapons but that the other transformations were even more painful. Tsuyu quickly wrapped her tongue around Midoriya and pulled him safely into the water after the villains were rendered unconscious. Mineta, astonished, thought about how Midoriya always seemed to pull off the most impressive feats. Tsuyu praised Midoriya for the unexpected display. Midoriya admitted that he rarely used the transformation because of its power and the pain. Another student reminded Midoriya that, once a transformation had been made for the first time, it would not hurt as much afterward. Tsuyu asked what they should do next. Midoriya said their top priority was calling for help and, if possible, following the shoreline to the exit while avoiding the plaza. Tsuyu noted that it looked like Aizawa was drawing a large number of villains to the plaza. Midoriya explained that their teacher was more than holding his own but had deliberately jumped into danger to protect the students. Mineta teased Midoriya for seeming naive, but Midoriya clarified that he was not suggesting they dive back into the fight. As class representative, he could not recklessly lead his classmates into danger, They would wait for an opening to rejoin the fight safely. Their first battle had ended with a win, but Midoriya admitted to himself that he had made a dangerous miscalculation in thinking they had a real chance against all of their enemies. Landslide Zone Todoroki walked past many frozen villains and commented that dividing and conquering had proved effective. He found it hard to view these enemies as anything but thugs who could not handle the quirks they wielded. One villain complained in pain from being restrained and was incredulous that Todoroki was just a kid. Todoroki assessed that, although the villains had used numbers to try to overwhelm All Might, only a handful of them were truly dangerous. Todoroki warned a restrained villain that frostbite would soon set in and that heroes did not do such cruel things for sport. He demanded to know the villain's plan and what made them think they could kill All Might. Central Plaza, a blue-haired villain counted down seconds while dodging Aizawa's attacks. Aizawa tried to land a punch but had his elbow grabbed and began to feel it disintegrate. He managed to break free with a strike, then deftly avoided and defeated 2 more attackers. The blue-haired villain taunted Aizawa for choosing to be in a long, chaotic group battle rather than the quick sneak attacks he specialized in, and clarified that he was not the boss. A strange creature then appeared beside the villain. The villain addressed 13, sneering that a disaster relief hero could not match even ordinary heroes in a fight. A mist materialized around 13, and his own quirk suddenly backfired, overwhelming him and leaving him badly injured. The students urgently called out that their teacher was hurt. 13 thought he had been warped by the enemy and feared the worst. Sato ordered Ida to run. Ida shouted in frustration as he tried to act, but Shoji held back one of the villains from stopping him. Ida steeled himself, knowing the whole class was depending on him and resolved to keep everyone going. Izuku stood in shock as they saw the creature, one hand pinning Aizawa to the ground and the other holding Aizawa's damaged arm. The blue-haired villain identified it as a bioengineered Nomu, the anti-symbol of peace. In the collapsed zone, Kirishima said that those were all the villains they could see and urged the group to hurry and help the others. He worried about classmates who had few options for offense and about 13-sensei being overwhelmed because they had rushed ahead. Kirishima took responsibility for their mistake. Bakugo said he would go alone to take down the Warp Gate villain, insisting he would beat him severely. Another student warned that immature behavior was ill-timed and that normal attacks might not work against that opponent. Bakugo argued back that taking out the Warp Gate would stop the villains from escaping and that he had methods for dealing with him. An invisible villain, approaching quietly, thought it would be easy to catch Bakugo off guard. Bakugo reacted instantly, slamming the invisible villain down and producing an explosive attack. Kirishima admired his reflexes and noted that Bakugo seemed unusually composed. Bakugo insisted he was always calm, and then broke off, deciding to leave. A classmate said he would come along, convinced by Bakugo. On the plaza, Aizawa observed that the ability to cancel quirks was useful but not decisive against overwhelming strength. He noted that looking at the Nomu should nullify its power, and that the creature's base strength appeared to rival All Might's. The Nomu slammed Aizawa into the ground with brutal force, leaving a dent in the surface. Midoriya, Tsuyu, and Mineta stood hidden and in shock. Kurojairi reported to Tamura Shigaraki that Kurojairi had been incapacitated but that some students had not been carried away and one had escaped. Shigaraki said that he would have destroyed Kurojairi if he were not needed for their escape. Shigaraki concluded that they could not stand against a dozen pro heroes and announced they were leaving. Mineta reacted with hope that they were saved. Mineta then made a clumsy move but was stopped. Izuku had a bad feeling. He thought it was reckless for the villains to leave things like this and worried that UA would be in greater danger if they escaped. He remembered the villains' intention to target the symbol of peace and feared the consequences of their actions. Shigaraki, addressing the group, said they would wound the pride of the symbol of peace before leaving. He appeared near Tsuyu and placed a hand on her face in a threatening manner. He praised Aizawa, noting how impressive he was as Aizawa attempted to erase his quirk. Izuku took the chance to strike, aiming at Shigaraki but instead connecting with the Nomu. The punch sent a strong shockwave through the air. Izuku realized the Nomu showed no lasting injury despite the force of his attacks, and he understood how the villains intended to overwhelm All Might. Shigaraki reacted, ordering the Nomu to eliminate Izuku. The Nomu attempted to grab Izuku, who dodged, but the creature was relentless. A classmate named Greed told another student to do exactly as instructed and promised to use observation to call out the Nomu's movements. Greed said he would watch and warn about incoming attacks. The other student replied yes and followed Greed's guidance. Greed used his observation to predict the Nomu's strikes, calling out a leftward attack. The Nomu threw a punch to the left and Izuku dodged. Izuku instructed Mineta and Tsuyu to take Aizawa-sensei and get him out of danger, insisting that as class president their safety was his priority and that he would hold the line until pro-heroes arrived. Mineta and Tsuyu understood and obeyed. Greed continued to call out the Nomu's pattern, warning of a right-side punch followed by several rapid strikes that could be avoided by a small jump back. The Nomu followed the predicted sequence, but as the fight war on the creature accelerated, Shigaraki, watching, declared that Izuku's skill made him a target and ordered the Nomu to kill him. The Nomu moved even faster, and Izuku began to struggle to keep up. The Nomu connected with a devastating blow to Izuku's midsection, sending him crashing into a wall. He was winded and in intense pain, struggling to breathe and unable to move easily. The others watched in horror as Izuku lay there. The Nomu, assuming he was incapacitated, turned toward Uraraka to strike, but Izuku forced himself up and intercepted. He caught the Nomu's arm and twisted to kneel it, temporarily disabling the limb. The Nomu's regenerative abilities quickly restored it, however. Izuku noted that the Nomu's regeneration made conventional damage meaningless, and Shigaraki observed that whatever Izuku did seemed impressive but ultimately futile. Shigaraki explained that Nomu did not have only one quirk. Nomu possessed two: rapid regeneration and shock absorption. Izuku realized why his punches had seemed ineffective, then noticed that he had just managed to break Nomu's arm. Greed told him that quirks could not be active forever and that Nomu had let his guard down when he thought Izuku was down, allowing the injury. Greed suggested there might be a limit to how much the absorption quirk could handle and advised Izuku to strike as frequently as possible. Izuku protested that using Greed directly would be useless because Nomu could regenerate and that he would only endanger others. Greed admitted feeling useless here and advised Izuku to develop a heightened sensory awareness right away. Greed instructed him to close his eyes, clear his thoughts, and concentrate on sensing his surroundings to predict his opponent's moves. Izuku tried as instructed but initially could not sense anything. Nomu struck his left arm and Izuku felt the break. After more blows, a strange blue shimmer appeared in Izuku's perception. The shimmer grew clearer and more points of light began to appear. Greed noted that the blue shimmer represented every person in the USJ, with the largest, nearest flame being Nomu. Izuku said he could now discern their shapes more clearly. Greed encouraged him that he was on the right path. When Izuku sensed a strike coming to his right side, he understood and dodged Nomu's punch, then countered with a kick to the ribs. They exchanged blows for several minutes as Izuku learned to time and predict the creature's movements. Shigaraki called Nomu over and murmured instructions. Nomu turned toward Momo, who had just arrived at the plaza. Nomu then grabbed a shard of rock and hurled it toward her. Izuku shouted a warning but his voice did not reach her in time. He dashed forward and pushed her out of the way, taking the hit himself. The rock struck near his left eye, causing intense pain and blurring his vision. Nomu seized his head and tried to crush him, but a sudden thunderous noise interrupted the assault. A towering figure announced his arrival, declaring that he was there to help. The students breathed in relief and recognized him as All Might. He had cut short a meeting with the principal and rushed over after meeting Ida along the way. All Might spoke of how furious he had been to hear the situation and how he had to stand tall for the students. Shigaraki sneered roughly at All Might, calling him worthless trash. Uraraka observed that All Might did not look like his usual smiling self. In a blur of motion, All Might took down the other villains, cleared the immediate area, and pulled Izuku away from further harm. Shigaraki taunted All Might about his speed, suggesting he might be weaker. Gasping and out of breath, Izuku explained that the creature beside Shigaraki was Nomu and that it had two quirks: regeneration and shock absorption. He warned that physical hits were usually useless unless Nomu let his guard down or was struck repeatedly until the absorption could no longer hold. All Might thanked Izuku for protecting the students and praised his effort, then tended to the wounded and brought him to the others. Uraraka cried over Izuku's condition and begged him to hold on. Izuku protested that he was not dead. All Might crossed the plaza and launched a powerful attack, shouting the name of his move as he struck Nomu in the chest. The attack had no visible effect. Nomu's absorption continued to blunt the blow. All Might then lifted Nomu and slammed his head down onto the ground, trying to end the threat, when Kurogiri created a warp gate and used it to interfere with All Might's momentum. Nomu seized the opportunity to grab All Might and force him toward the portal. The villain's plan was to have Nomu restrain All Might while Kurogiri used the warp to leave him trapped and incapacitated. Kurogiri explained coldly that Nomu's job was to neutralize All Might's blinding speed and hold him still while the warp gate closed partway, leaving him immobilized and unable to continue. Izuku attempted to run to All Might but lacked the strength. Katsumi arrived, created a controlled explosion, and pinned Kurogiri by the collar. She accused him of relying on mist to hide his real body and pointed out that the parts he could turn into mist must be limited. If his entire body were mist and physical attacks never worked, he would have had no close calls to complain about. Kurogiri acknowledged the bind but warned that beating him would not alone free All Might. Katsumi taunted him further while keeping him pinned, threatening to take him out if he tried anything. Kirishima commented that such tactics were not exactly heroic in tone. Todoroki then used precise ice control to freeze Nomu's right side just enough to loosen its grip without harming allies nearby. Thanks to Todoroki's precision, All Might's restraints slackened and he was able to push free. Nomu's frozen portion began to break and regenerate almost immediately, then it lunged at Katsumi. The creature struck her and sent her skidding across the plaza toward a wall. The students shouted Bakugu's name in alarm. Kirishima noted that Bakugu had managed to dodge the attack. Bakugu made it clear that he had not been staying quiet. Izuku could not see a thing. Smoke thinned and a figure emerged. It was All Might. Shigaraki observed that All Might did not know how to hold back and wondered how young Midoriya had managed to endure so long against such power. Shigaraki also thought that All Might had taken the hit for the kid. Todoroki, Katsumi, and Kirishima recognized the young fighter as Midoriya and were astonished that he had faced the creature. Shigaraki ranted that heroes and villains both relied on violence and that the world still labeled people simply as good or evil. He accused All Might of being a tool of violence meant to keep others down and vowed he would show the world by killing him. A second villain dismissed Shigaraki's words as self-righteous nonsense and accused him of enjoying the chaos. Shigaraki admitted the accusation. Todoroki assessed that the odds were 3 against 4. Kirishima admitted the villains were brutal but believed that with the students supporting All Might they could push them back. All Might said he had little time left and was weakening faster than expected, but reminded himself that he was the symbol of peace and had no choice but to keep fighting. All Might launched himself at the Nomu and they exchanged a burst of blows. Shigaraki noted that the Nomu had shock absorption, and another villain agreed while pointing out it was absorption, not negation, so it must have limits. All Might recalled Midoriya's observation about limits and pushed beyond them. He resolved to break through whatever defenses the Nomu had and shouted that heroes must go beyond their limits. All Might's final blow overwhelmed the Nomu and sent it flying out of the facility. Kirishima described All Might's attack as a comic-style smash through the Nomu's defenses, and Todoroki and Katsumi reflected that this was the level of the pros. All Might felt himself slowing. In his prime a few punches would have sufficed, but he had delivered hundreds of hits and his time was nearly up. The villains accused him of cheating by weakening, claiming the Nomu had not been as powerful as they expected. Shigaraki insisted they had been lied to when told the Nomu could withstand everything. Todoroki suggested they were not ready for this level yet. Kirishima advised Bakugu to hold back to avoid being taken hostage. Katsumi protested that he would not rush in. All Might used the transformation mist as part of his edge, and Izuku realized that the steam in the dust cloud looked like the sign of All Might's change. Izuku knew he could not move much longer, the Nomu had been too strong and one more step would cause him to lose his grip. He decided to keep the villains scared and buy a little more time. Shigaraki regretted the absence of another Nomu and fretted that they had lost their advantage. Kurogiri urged Shigaraki to remain calm, noting that the Nomu had dealt real damage and that the students were holding back for some reason. Reinforcements from the school were bound to arrive in a few minutes, and if Shigaraki and Kurogiri double-teamed All Might, they still had a chance. Shigaraki muttered that they could do it and called All Might the final boss. Kirishima said that All Might would handle the big threats and suggested the students go help the others. Todoroki, Katsumi, and Kirishima walked toward the entrance. Izuku, struggling, thought the mist was the most dangerous thing and worried that if it consumed All Might he would be in serious trouble. The villains started to run toward All Might. Kurogiri created a large portal to try to SEK All Might in, but a thin, straight black line suddenly burst across the ground and interrupted the attack, leaving a deep scar on the surface. At the other end of that line, Izuku held greed and thought that he was the only one who knew the trouble All Might was in before he passed out. Kirishima reacted in shock that he had not known Izuku could do that. Todoroki also noted that Izuku seemed injured. Shigaraki, irritated, ordered Kurogiri to change plans and kill that kid. Kurogiri opened a gate and the villains appeared beside Izuku. Shigaraki reached toward Izuku's head, but his hand was stopped. Nizu apologized that they were a little late. Shigaraki warned that with the heroes present they had no chance and that he might have failed as the symbol of peace, but vowed that next time All Might would be dead, then vanished through the gate Kurogiri had formed. The pros now faced the full measure of their enemy, and the students of Class 1A had been confronted with that reality far too soon. This attack would mark the start of a greater incident, though they had no way of knowing it yet. Snipe reacted in surprise at the sudden retreat. Midnight noted that the attackers had fled after such a dramatic invasion. Nizu urged everyone to focus on the students' well-being. Cementos fell silent for a moment as they gathered their bearings. At the plaza, All Might registered how bad the situation looked. Todoroki observed that the teachers and pro-heroes had assembled and that it appeared the school itself had not been attacked. Kirishima ran to All Might, praising the fight and checking if he was all right. All Might thought that Kirishima had a good heart but worried about being discovered and told himself to hold back. Cementos instructed the students to head to the gate to be accounted for. Kirishima agreed and sprinted toward the entrance, then stopped and asked that Midoriya be looked after because he had seemed badly hurt. Cementos assured him they would take care of Midoriya, adding that he was a fan and wanted to get him to the nurse's office without revealing this side of himself, and warned him to stop overexerting. All Might admitted that he would have been lost if he had not gone all out. Their opponents had been extremely strong. Elsewhere, the League of Villains regrouped. Shigaraki reported that he had been struck and rendered unable to continue, that their forces had been taken down in a flash, and that even their expendable operatives had been defeated. He said that Nomu had also been lost and accused their leader of being wrong. The leader replied that they had been overconfident and had underestimated their opponents. They had simply moved too quickly. Kurogiri explained that Nomu had been sent flying during the battle and that, without precise coordinates, there was no way to retrieve him through warping. Another member lamented the loss after all the effort to make Nomu as powerful as All Might. Shigaraki described one young student who had fought nearly as strongly as All Might. The boy's raw strength was not yet at the same level, but he had dealt serious damage to Nomu, seemed to anticipate its moves, and likely had more to show than he had revealed. One of the villains reacted in disbelief at that report. Shigaraki seethed that without that pest they might have killed All Might, but that kid had interfered and spoiled their plan. He ordered that stronger troops be found and preparations made. They could not move freely yet and needed a symbol like Tamura Shigaraki to spread terror. He vowed that next time the world would know what they represented. Outside the USJ, a detective counted the students and noted that, aside from one suffering significant injury, the others appeared unharmed. The detective said they would escort the students back to the classroom for now. Tsuyu asked about Aizawa. The detective replied that Aizawa's arms had been severely broken and his face had sustained fractures, but there was no brain damage. He reported that 13 had deep cuts across the back and upper arms but was expected to survive, and that All Might's injuries were not life-threatening. Recovery support had taken him to the nurse's office. Uraraka and Ida asked about Midoriya. The detective responded that Midoriya was the most severely injured student: broken ribs and lung trauma, a shattered arm, significant blood loss, and a severe injury to his left eye that would leave him unable to see with it. The detective spoke with visible worry and said Midoriya's chances were uncertain. Everyone reacted with dismay. Uraraka began to cry, and Momo felt overwhelming guilt. Momo cried that he had lost his eye because of her, and the others moved to comfort her. Nisa declared that the school would need a complete overhaul of its security systems. Midnight remarked that teleportation quirks were rare and lamented that one had turned villainous. A police officer then reported to Detective Tsukachi that a suspect had been apprehended in a thicket about 400 meters away, seemingly unharmed and not resisting arrest, and that the suspect was not responding verbally and appeared mute. Tsukachi asked to conduct a thorough search of the school. Principal Nizu agreed that the police had jurisdiction and urged him to do whatever was necessary. In the UA infirmary, Recovery Girl assessed the situation and found no grounds to reprimand the staff this time. She warned that her own abilities had likely been shortened and she might only be able to help for a brief time each day. Detective Tsukachi greeted All Might and asked about the villains. All Might interrupted to ask about the students and the teachers. Tsukachi reported that the two teachers were out of danger and that, aside from the students sent to the hospital, the students were mostly okay. When All Might asked how the injured student was doing, Tsukachi reiterated that the prognosis was poor. All Might blamed himself for not arriving sooner, but Tsukachi insisted that the three heroes had put their lives on the line and that the students had also shown remarkable courage. Tsukachi explained that the teachers had been out of the immediate area 30 minutes before and that Midoriya had been the student who had delayed the villains long enough to protect the others. He had seen it himself and was surprised at the length of time Midoriya had held out. Tsukachi emphasized that the entire class had faced a real battle at a young age and survived, and he expressed confidence that the members of Class 1A would become mighty heroes. Classes were cancelled for the next 2 weeks, but the students could not rest easy. Izuku made his way to the classroom when he heard Ida shouting that morning homeroom would begin in 5 minutes. The teacher told the students to return to their seats. Shiro questioned why Midoriya was the only one standing and why they should calm down when the event started in 5 minutes. Midoriya laughed, and everyone turned their heads faster than seemed possible. Uraraka immediately rushed forward, relief written all over her face as she told Midoriya she had feared he would be dead. Shiro scolded him for worrying everyone. Kirishima tightened his fist, a small tear escaping as he admitted he had thought Midoriya would be hospitalized for months and praised how fast he had healed. Midoriya replied that he was more robust than they thought and that they could not take him down easily. Shiro reminded them they had already discovered that at the USJ. Todoroki acknowledged underestimating him, and Ishido noted that the injuries had turned out to be nothing for Midoriya. Momo lowered her gaze and apologized, blaming herself for Midoriya losing his eye. Midoriya reassured her that it was his fault for jumping in to protect her and that losing an eye did not mean he would die. Ojiro remarked that most people would panic or become depressed in that situation. Tokoyami added that Midoriya had been close to dying from blood loss. Midoriya managed only a short sound in response. Aizawa commanded everyone to be quiet and return to their seats. Ida called out that he was glad to see the teacher doing well. Uraraka compared Midoriya to Aizawa, noting that Midoriya looked better despite being more injured. Aizawa brushed off concern for himself and announced that the school administration had decided the students would move into the dorms until graduation. He explained that living on campus would offer advantages. Pro-heroes could be nearby, which would be safer given that villains might target quirk users, and Midoriya in particular had been a repeated target. Parents had been consulted and had agreed, so the move would happen in 1 week. Ishido expressed excitement at the prospect of living with friends. Mineta reacted in a more animated, eager way that caused the girls to glare. Kirishima reassured them he and the others would keep an eye on Mineta. Midoriya offered that, since they would be living together, classmates could call him Izuku. Kirishima happily accepted the nickname and urged others to use informal names too. Ishido asked to be called Mina, and Aoyama told them they could call him Yuga. Tokoyami said his name, and Hagakure did the same. Aizawa called them back to order and began homeroom. The new dormitory had been completed just 3 days earlier and sat only a 5-minute walk from the main building. Midoriya thought of it as their new home. Mina marveled at how large the building was and said they were lucky. Aizawa explained that each class would have a building with girls' rooms on the right and boys' rooms on the left, and that the first floor was a common area. Inside, Aizawa pointed out the dining hall, baths, and laundry rooms. Mina squealed at how spacious it was. Shiro mentioned the courtyard. Uraraka joked about the luxury. Mineta gleefully noted that having baths and laundry in the common area was a dream come true. Aizawa reminded him that facilities were split by gender and told him to behave. They took the elevator to the second floor. Aizawa explained that rooms started on the second floor, with 3 boys' rooms and 3 girls' rooms on each floor for 5 floors total. Each student would have a private room equipped with air conditioning, a toilet, a refrigerator, and a closet. Ida pointed out the veranda, and Momo observed that the closets were as large as hers at home, prompting playful remarks about her wealth. Aizawa continued with room assignments. On the second floor were Sato, Shiro, Aoyama, Yaoyorozu, and Azui. The third floor housed Koda, Kaminari, Ojiro, Jiro, and Hagakure. The fourth floor held Shoji, Ida, Tokoyami, Uraraka, and Ishido, and the fifth floor included Mineta, Midoriya, Kirishima, Bakugu, and Todoroki. Aizawa warned Midoriya not to let Mineta peek on the girls, counting on him for supervision. Kirishima and Midoriya assured him they would keep watch. Aizawa said the luggage they'd sent ahead should already be in their rooms and that the day was reserved for settling in. He promised to keep the weekend short for everyone's sake and dismissed them. The students cheered. That night, Kaminari reflected on how glad he was that the group would be living together despite how they had ended up there. Kirishima said he was exhausted. Ida declared that communal living would be another way to train their sense of law and order, and Shiro teased him good-naturedly. The girls came to check on the boys' rooms, and the boys said they were just relaxing. Mina proposed that they peek into each other's rooms, and after a moment of hesitation from Kaminari, they agreed it would be fun. They started with Aoyama's room, which sparkled with decorative trinkets. Aoyama's flair for glitter and light made Mina and Uraraka react in amusement. Sato's room came next. Sato admitted it was a little plain, but the smell of something baking drew them in. He had baked a chiffon cake in his rush to move in and offered slices. The cake was light and fluffy, and the girls praised his talent. Momo suggested they pair his pastries with tea. Sato confessed he had only been practicing to train his quirk, and Shiro quipped that the name, Sugarman, suited him. They moved on to Shiro's room, which Mina found exotic and Uraraka admired for its style. Jiro commented that she had never expected Shiro to be so stylish. Ojiro's room was plain and unadorned, just as Mina had been told. Kaminari's room felt playful and diverse, with a little of everything. Koda's room featured a small, friendly pet bunny that Mina and Uraraka found adorable and played with, and the classmates joked that having a pet felt like cheating in a game of room tours. The group agreed they were enjoying the variety and energy of living together. A brief, neutral bridge sentence maintained the continuity between scenes. The tour continued through the dormitory as laughter and conversation filled the halls, the students already making the building feel like home. Mineta shouted that it was unfair that only the boys had to present their rooms and argued that, since it was an exhibition, they should see the girls' rooms too. He framed it as a chance to decide the best interior decorator in class. Mina agreed that it was a great idea, and another Mina declared they were there to decide the king of rooms. Mineta looked pleased at the plan. Todoroki felt sleepy. They moved down the boys' wing on the fourth floor. Uraraka confirmed that the floor had Ida, Shoji, and Tokoyami. Tokoyami grumbled in front of his door as Mina and Hagakure pushed him aside and barged into his room, calling it dark and scary. Tokoyami muttered in frustration while Kiri glanced at a set of keychains and remarked that they looked like ones he had bought in middle school. At Ida's room, Mina noted the stacks of advanced books and said that it was clearly Ida's space. Ida reported that there was nothing out of the ordinary. Uraraka teased that he had a glasses obsession after spotting a collection of frames. Ida defended his habit, explaining he expected to go through many pairs during intense training. Shoji's room turned out to be sparse, with only a small desk and a futon. They went up to the 5th floor. Mina announced they would start with Kirishima. Kirishima thought the girls probably would not fully appreciate his room, but he took pride in it and shouted about its manliness. Toru made a playful comment about rankings, and Uraraka joked about the macho decor while pointing to a poster that read, "Burning up with manliness." Kirishima laughed and they moved on. Mineta invited the girls to his room, but they walked away. The group turned their attention to Izuku. Momo thought of him as their most capable student, Mina thought he was handsome, and Toru wondered what Izuku's room would be like. Kirishima noted that Izuku had not been around, and Toru suggested they peek. Kirishima objected to intruding on private space. Mina insisted they would not open anything locked, and since Izuku's door was unlocked, everyone cheered and opened it. A huge metal bar blocked the doorway. Uraraka described it as a metal stick preventing entry. Jiro identified it as a weight, and Mina guessed it must be extremely heavy. Kirishima admired Izuku's strength. Momo asked Sato to try to move it with his quirk. Sato strained and barely shifted it while the other boys could not budge it and panted with effort. Izuku then appeared at the door and asked what they were doing outside his room. Mina explained the contest to find the most beautiful room and asked him not to be upset. Izuku said he had nothing to hide. A crude remark from Mineta was quickly dismissed. Izuku said he had just been running and had finished his shower. Ochako asked if he could remove the weight so they could see his room. Izuku apologized for the obstruction and explained he had been planning to ask Aizawa-sensei about moving it to the training room. He then lifted the enormous weight easily with one hand. Everyone shouted in amazement at his strength. Shiro asked how heavy it was, and Izuku replied in a flat tone that it felt like 50 tons, which produced shocked reactions. Kirishima calmed them and they entered Izuku's room. Inside, Mina admired how cool the room looked. Shiro pointed out a huge television, and Jiro noticed an electric guitar. Izuku confirmed that he could play. Ochako asked about several guns mounted on the walls. Izuku explained that he used to use them but now preferred his sword, so he kept the guns as decoration. A few of the students glanced around the room, searching for anything notable, but they found only ordinary personal items. Mina asked what they were looking for. A crude suggestion had been made and was quickly set aside. Izuku reiterated that there was nothing of that sort in his room, and the group moved on to continue the tour. The girls wondered whether he was interested in adult material. Kirishima noted that Bakugo should have been next to show his room, but she had found it boring and gone to bed, so it was Todoroki's turn. Todoroki admitted fatigue and wished to finish quickly. Mina pointed out that the room had a Japanese style and that it was constructed differently from theirs. Todoroki explained that his family home was traditionally Japanese and that he did not like modern flooring. Shiro asked how Todoroki had managed to remodel his room in one day, and Todoroki acknowledged that Midoriya had helped. Ochako realized she should have asked for help sooner. Mina announced that she would go next. Mina's room was presented with a flourish. She crowed that it was pretty cute. Shiro countered that it was wildly decorated. Uraraka welcomed everyone to her modest room. The group murmured in appreciation, but Ojiro confessed that walking around and seeing all the girls' rooms felt oddly NTMT. Tokoyami dubbed it the Forbidden Garden. Mina urged Jiro to show her room, and Jiro admitted embarrassment as she led them inside. Kaminari was surprised to find even more instruments than expected, and Ochako asked if Jiro could really play them all. Jiro said she could, to some extent, and Kaminari declared that nothing about the room felt girly. Aoyama declined in his characteristic manner. Mina moved the two boys aside with her quirk and announced that the next room belonged to Hagakure, who bounded about excitedly. Mina assessed Hagakure's space as expected and exciting. Next was Tsuyu's room, which Ochako found charming because of all the frog plushes. Ojiro agreed it was cute. Ida scolded Uraraka for touching other people's things, but Uraraka protested that the plushes were irresistible. Tsuyu laughed softly and said she had plenty of them. Uraraka cheered. Yaoyorozu opened the final door. She admitted that she had miscalculated. Compared to the others, her room felt cramped despite containing the same items she used at home. The others teased that she seemed a princess in contrast. In the common area on the first floor, Mina finished tallying votes and reminded everyone not to vote for themselves. With Bakugo out of contention, Mina announced that Rikudo Sato had won the provisional second place with 6 votes for the most original room. Sato reacted with surprise. Todoroki asked to be allowed to sleep, and Mina interrupted the suspense to hint that the top winner was obvious to everyone. Momo named Izuku as the clear winner. Mina tossed her voting slip aside. Izuku was puzzled by why his room had been judged the most unusual. Ochako defended it enthusiastically, likening all the equipment to an agent's arsenal. Mina revealed that Izuku had received 10 votes in total. Todoroki took his leave to sleep. Izuku dreamed. In the dream he was small and had tripped over a branch. He cried out in pain and his younger mother rushed over, alarmed that his knee was bleeding badly. She asked if he was all right, and Izuku sobbed that it hurt. His younger father began to say something about the injury, then paused as everyone watched Izuku's wound close and heal on its own. His mother exclaimed that this was a healing quirk and that she was so happy their son could become a great hero. His father smiled in a way that made Izuku uneasy. The father suggested taking their son somewhere to test the quirk's limits. His mother agreed but pleaded that he should not be hurt. The father reassured her and insisted he would never harm the boy, though his smile seemed shadowed and unsettling. He offered to homeschool Izuku so they could focus on his training and promised his mother she would receive pictures of his progress. Later, in a dim space in the dream, Izuku endured harsh training designed to push his endurance and control. He cried out that it hurt. His father urged him to stay quiet and to endure the testing. The father continued the regimen to learn how strong Izuku's quirk truly was, while Izuku pleaded that their mother would be upset. The father shouted at him and insisted he would do whatever was necessary to determine the quirk's limits. Despite the difficulty of the sessions, Izuku's wounds would close quickly because of his healing ability. A short, neutral pause bridged the scene. The narrator remembered his father's confession. His father had said that he had married the narrator's mother only for her quirk, hoping their child would inherit something valuable. His father had laughed about how lucky he had been and called the mother an idiot for not noticing his intentions, insisting that everything had gone according to plan. The narrator had asked whether his father loved his mother or him. The father had answered that he had never liked the mother, but the narrator was different. The father had explained that the narrator's quirk was exceptional. It prevented death from starvation, torture, or blood loss and allowed immediate recovery. The father had said the narrator was the best and that, without him, his plan would have been much weaker. A few days later, the narrator recalled his father bringing him before All-For-One. All-For-One had placed a hand on the narrator's face and then told his father that what they wanted was ready. For-One had warned the father to wait a few minutes. The process would complete in about 15 minutes. The father had laughed triumphantly, but an explosion interrupted him. A villain on the scene shouted that heroes had arrived. The father muttered that the woman had not been as foolish as he thought and then hurried out, leaving the narrator behind. Soon after, heroes forced their way into the room. The 2 heroes who entered froze at the sight. The room showed clear signs of a violent struggle, with broken restraints and instruments scattered throughout. One of the heroes, visibly shaken, could not hide his distress. The woman hero who had accompanied him began to cry. The narrator, terrified and desperate, begged not to be hurt and promised to do anything they wanted. The heroes reassured him that they were there to save him. They worked to free the narrator from the chains that had held him to the wall, and 2 other heroes joined them to help. As they helped him, everything faded to black. The narrator woke up gasping and sweating, shaken by how real the memory had felt. He tried to tell himself it was just a nightmare, but the image lingered. Since it was Sunday and he had promised to visit his mother, he forced himself to get ready and left the dorms. The train ride felt long as he thought about the dream. He resolved to ask his mother about it when he arrived. At home, his mother threw her arms around him and said she had been worried after only 2 days. She admitted she could not stop worrying about him since the incident. When he pressed her about what she meant, she stopped and took a breath, then told him the truth. His mother explained that the nightmare was not just a dream but fragments of his actual memories. After the heroes had rescued him, they had arranged for someone to modify his memories to protect him. She confessed, through tears, that his father had stolen his quirk. She apologized again and again, blaming her blind love for his father for what he had suffered. The narrator comforted her and said it was not her fault. He was alive, and that was what mattered. The next day, their class gathered and their teacher Izawa greeted everyone and asked how the move into the dorms had gone. Ida replied that the move had gone well. Izawa then announced that the sports festival was approaching. When Ojiro asked if it was appropriate given a villain attack 3 weeks earlier, Izawa explained that the festival was necessary to demonstrate that UA's crisis management protocols were sound and to keep morale and training on track. Izawa reminded the class that compared to last year there would be 5 times the police presence and that the sports festivals were the greatest opportunity they would get. He emphasized that it was not an event that could be cancelled over a few villains and that the UA Sports Festival had become Japan's chief stage for aspiring heroes. Momo explained that the nation's pro-heroes would be watching as scouts. Kaminari noted that they would be looking to hire students as sidekicks after graduation. Jiro warned that many sidekicks never managed to go solo and remained sidekicks forever. Izawa advised that being chosen by a big-name hero would bring experience and popularity but that their time was limited. They had 3 chances at the annual festival and 2 months to train, so they should not waste them. Later, at lunchtime, Kirishima exclaimed that he was pumped and that showing their skills would be a big step toward going pro. Shiro reflected that everyone was excited. Izuku asked if anyone wasn't excited, and Ida said this was their chance to add their names to the ranks of heroes and that they were all in high spirits. Tsuyu commented that Ida's way of showing it was unusual. Uraraka looked determined and told Midoriya and Ida that at the sports festival they should all do their best. Kirishima reacted in surprise to Uraraka's fierce expression. Mina observed that Uraraka did not seem like herself. Uraraka declared that she would give everything she had and punch the air, and everyone cheered along. A short while later, Izuku asked Uraraka why she wanted to become a hero. Uraraka admitted that her motivation was financial. Her parents ran a construction company that had fallen on hard times, and she wanted to earn money as a hero so her parents could have an easier life. Ida reflected that having a hero license would allow her to help them. Ochako pleaded that they keep her reason private. All Might then found Izuku and asked to speak with him privately. Izuku looked to Ida and Ochako, who nodded, and he followed All Might into the break room. All Might asked Izuku to answer honestly about ki and whether he understood it. Izuku acknowledged that he knew what ki was and that he could use it, though not yet properly. All Might asked when Izuku had learned about it and begun training. Izuku replied that it had been 10 months before UA and pointed to the sword at his side, explaining that its name was Greed. He indicated that greed was the reason he had knowledge of ki. All Might listened, surprised at the idea of a talking sword, and then encouraged Izuku by saying he saw the spirit of a true hero in him. Proof of it had been Izuku's fight at the US. All Might offered to train Izuku, explaining that he would not be able to train him in the first month but would begin training in the second, and asked Izuku to meet him at Dagoba Beach at 5. Izuku agreed. 3 days later, there was a knock on Izuku's door and Todoroki asked to speak with him. Todoroki explained that his father, Endeavor, had pursued fame and strength obsessively and had arranged a quirk marriage to gain access to his mother's quirk. Todoroki said his mother had been pressured into the marriage and had suffered for it. In a moment of anger she had splashed hot water, injuring the left side of her face, and Todoroki vowed never to use that side, refusing to inherit his father's path. He declared that he intended to surpass his father without using that side and walked away with tears at the corners of his eyes. Izuku called Todoroki back and, after Todoroki turned around, began to share a painful secret in return. Izuku revealed that his father had been a villain who had presented himself as normal to get close to Izuku's mother. Izuku said his father had intended to use their child as a tool to reach his own ambitions. When Izuku's quirk manifested, he had been subjected to harsh tests and experiments. A man with the ability to steal and transfer. Quirks had taken Izuku's quirk and given it to Izuku's father. The heroes had found Izuku, and because of the trauma he had experienced, his memories had been altered for his own protection. Izuku added that he had a regeneration quirk that brought him back from the worst of it. Todoroki stood in silence, surprised to hear of an experience that matched or even exceeded his own. Izuku expressed gratitude to the heroes who had intervened. Without them he could not have moved forward. He said he could never forgive the man who had used him and his mother and vowed to do everything in his power to stop that plan. Izuku told Todoroki that it would be impossible to become the #1 hero by refusing to use part of himself, and he insisted that Todoroki's power belonged to Todoroki alone, not to his father. Katsumi made her way to her room and noticed Todoroki Shoko knocking on Izuku Midoriya's door. She thought it was strange that Todoroki was visiting, so she hid behind the doorway when Izuku let her in. Katsumi overheard their conversation and put the pieces together. The month Izuku had missed school, the way he had returned looking lifeless, his father's disappearance. She began to suspect Izuku had been through something traumatic and felt guilty that he had not confided in her. She wondered if she had been a bad friend. The next day at lunch, Ochako Uraraka ran toward Izuku and asked him to train her in hand-to-hand combat because her quirk was not suited for close fighting. Izuku agreed to train her for a month and then continued training on his own. Mina Ishido and Momo Yaoyorozu also asked Izuku to teach them. When Izuku asked who else wanted to join, Kyoka Jiro, Mei Hatsum, Tsuyu Azui, and to everyone's surprise, Todoroki Shoko raised their hands. Todoroki later thanked Izuku for his help the previous day, and Izuku responded that helping people was part of being a hero. Over the next month, the girls made strong progress. Izuku taught Ochako basic martial arts and helped each of the girls adapt their quirks into effective combat techniques. He also began training more intensively with All Might, who instructed him on controlling his ki. The lessons were demanding and required patience. 2 weeks after that, in the break room, All Might explained that his muscle form was becoming harder to sustain and that his current time limit was only 50 minutes. Izuku reacted with concern and apologized for any burden. All Might brushed off the apology and told him not to worry. All Might fell back onto the couch and told Izuku that they were alike. He admitted that his time left as the symbol of peace was running out and that some with villainous intent were beginning to notice. He had searched for someone with a strong hero sense to train as the next symbol of peace, and he believed that person was Izuku. All Might explained that the sports festival would be watched by the entire country, and he needed Izuku to show everyone that the symbol of peace still stood. After school in the classroom, Ochako looked out at the crowd and asked what was happening. Mineta complained about the lack of escape. Katsumi dismissed the visitors as scouting the competition and sneered at the idea that surviving a villain attack made the students noteworthy. Ida scolded Katsumi for speaking about people as extras. The purple-haired visitor explained that many students who had not made the hero course were in general studies and that the results of the sports festival might justify transferring some of them into the hero course. He declared his intention to use the festival to knock the hero course students off their pedestal and treated it as a declaration of war. Izuku apologized for Bakugu's behavior and acknowledged the visitors' right to try for the hero course. He told them that Class 1A would do their best and would not go easy on anyone. Katsumi replied that Class 1A would not be easy on them either. From a third-person perspective, 2 weeks later, journalists noted that security checks were taking a long time. One reporter observed that the event was under heavy guard after the villain attack and that many people were speaking out against holding the festival this year. Another reporter pointed out that controversy would bring higher ratings and that all eyes were on Class 1A. As usual, the third years often took the spotlight, but this year all attention had shifted to the first years. In Class 1 as prep room, Ida rallied everyone to get ready. Shoji lamented not being allowed to wear his costume, and Ojiro explained that costumes were prohibited in the interest of fairness. Aizu urged everyone to finish preparations and head to the stadium. At the festival, Present Mike hyped the crowd as the announcer. Midnight had been assigned to administer the athlete's oath for the first years. Tokoyami questioned whether Midnight's reputation was appropriate for a high school event, and others reminded him that the principal usually handled the third years. Midnight introduced the student representative from Class 1A, and Bakugu stepped forward to take the oath. Momo noted that Izuku, who had ranked first in the entrance exam, might have made a more natural choice, and Izuku admitted he had asked Bakugo to speak because he was not comfortable with public speeches. Katsumi then declared his determination to take first place, earning a chorus of complaints from classmates and a rueful comment from Izuku that he had regretted giving up the opportunity. Midnight announced the first event, the qualifiers, an obstacle course that traditionally eliminated many competitors. The course would be a 4-kilometer lap around the stadium, and the school's rules allowed almost anything as long as racers stayed on course. Racers lined up at the narrow starting gate. When the race began, the narrow gate proved an immediate challenge. Todoroki reacted quickly by activating their ice quirk to create an early barrier, freezing parts of the field and disrupting several racers. Some competitors struggled to move as the temperature dropped. Present Mike tried to coax Aizawa into commentary, but Aizawa declined. Kirishima and others praised Todoroki's quick thinking. Mineta attempted to make his move, but a robot hand struck him and sent him flying. Present Mike confirmed that the organizers had included faux villains and theatrical hazards to simulate obstacles and excitement. Giant robots and zero-point devices activated to block the path, modeled after the ones from the entrance exam. The presence of such elaborate obstacles surprised many who had not expected that level of challenge. Todoroki used ice to freeze some of the foes and then manipulated the situation to create an opening for Class 1A, taking advantage of the instability of the frozen barriers so that others would be slowed. Present Mike exuberantly praised Todoroki for bursting through and gaining a sizable lead. As some of the obstacles collapsed, classmates worried about someone being trapped underneath. Kirishima and Tetsu expressed alarm but quickly discovered that the student under the debris was alive and could be helped up. Class 1 as chaotic energy and teamwork pushed them forward as they navigated the engineered dangers and the packed field of competitors. The contest had only just begun, and the first years already faced a gauntlet designed to test their courage, creativity, and resolve. Kiri accused Katsumi of copying her. Katsumi thought she could not let the other get ahead, and she used her explosions to fly over the patrolling robots. Present Mike commented that Bakugo's usual low approach had not worked and that she had taken the high road instead. Siro, expecting Katsumi to break through in the usual way, followed her with a similar maneuver. Tokoyami moved into the same path, saying he would follow her wake. Present Mike then noted that the current leaders of the pack were overwhelmingly from Class 1A. Aizawa added that Class B and the other classes were not bad, but Class 1A had been exposed to real threats and had learned not to hesitate. Each student had grown from that exposure and learned to keep moving forward. With a loud impact from a nearby cannon, Momo stood nearby and dismissed the obstacle as easy. A path opened up. Katsumi had cleared the first barrier with little trouble. Present Mike warned that the second obstacle would be a fall that would eliminate anyone who failed, explaining that racers would have to crawl across to progress. The course announcer portrayed it dramatically, but the challenge itself was a large suspended rope. Tsuyu laughed at the harmless-looking obstacle and saw it as her chance. Mei seized the moment to activate her support items' wire arrows and hover saws, proud of the inventions her support class teammates had developed. Ochako noted that Mei was in the support course, and Mina wondered if such items were allowed. Mei clarified that support students could use costumes and items they had designed themselves and that this contest was their opportunity to display creativity to the industry. She activated her gear and drew attention to it. Ochako urged the others to chase down Mei, while Mina complained about how unfair it felt. Present Mike pointed out the variety of competitors trying to make a name for themselves. Aizawa wondered why some of the other students had slowed down, and Present Mike remarked that the leaders of the pack continued undaunted. Katsumi suddenly appeared behind Todoroki, prepared to overtake him. Todoroki thought she must have simply started slowly and then heated up. Ida, in third place, reminded himself that his brother was watching and that he must not perform poorly. Spectators observed that the racer in the lead was unstoppable. Her quirk was impressive, but she also had exceptional athleticism and perception. One spectator recognized her as the daughter of the flame hero known as Endeavor, and another predicted that pro heroes would soon be eager to recruit her. The leaders continued to pull ahead while the rest of the pack remained bunched together, all uncertain how many would advance. The leader reached the final barrier, a complicated minefield. The announcer described the field as patterned and visually confusing, warning racers to keep their eyes open and watch their step. He reassured everyone that the mines were designed to be loud and flashy rather than lethal, though they could be startling enough to leave a racer shaken and needing a change of clothes. The competitors prepared to navigate the minefield, tension and determination visible on their faces as the next phase of the trial began. Aizawa noted that it depended on the individual. Todoroki thought that the rules put whoever was leading at a disadvantage and that it was all a big show. Katsumi laughed that nothing could slow her down and activated her explosion. Present Mike announced that there was a new leader and urged the crowd to get excited, adding that the rest were catching up and that 2 competitors were grappling for first. He reported that Bakugo had taken an early lead and that Todoroki was trying to catch up, using his ice to move faster. Present Mike then declared that Todoroki had taken the lead again, with Ida close behind, creating 3 competitors fighting for first as only a few meters remained. Present Mike finished by announcing that Todoroki reached the stadium first, Bakugo was second, and the crowd reacted in surprise. Present Mike exclaimed his shock when Midoriya suddenly caught up with Ida. Aizawa observed that such unexpected moves were not unheard of for Midoriya, who often drew the most attention. Midnight explained that the top 40 from the qualifying round would move on, and reassured those who placed lower that there would be other opportunities to show their abilities. Midnight then introduced the main selection's second event as a paintball battle. Kaminari asked why paintball would prove anything. Mineta voiced uncertainty. Izuku suggested that the event was meant to test how students fought without their quirks, since some villains could have quirks similar to Aizawa's and not everything relied on powers. Tokoyami commented that the plan made sense. Midnight explained the rules clearly. Participants would form 6 teams of 3 and 1 team of 2. Each group would receive 3 paintball guns and 2 support items. Each participant had 3 targets to place anywhere exposed. When a target was hit, it would light up for 10 seconds. For each hit, the target's team would lose 100 points. If a team managed to hit all 3 targets of an opposing team within the 10-second window, they would gain all the points that enemy team held. Midnight added that each participant had been assigned a point value based on their ranking in the previous event, starting at 5 points for lower finishers and increasing up to 10 million points for the top-ranked participant. Everyone looked to Shoko as she felt the pressure. Midnight said that the participants would receive bracelets displaying their points, that the match would last 1 hour split into 2 30-minute halves, and that they had 15 minutes to choose teams and guns. Teams formed quickly. Ochako asked Izuku to team up with her. Mina also asked to join. Kirishima called on a friend to be his teammate. Izuku apologized and said he already knew who he wanted to team with and walked over to Shoko. Izuku invited Todoroki to join him. Todoroki hesitated, saying Izuku's association might cause them to lose, and noting many others wanted to team with Izuku. Izuku reassured Todoroki that he had a plan that worked best with him, and Todoroki agreed to join. Izuku pointed out that Midnight had said one team could have only 2 members, and that adding another would be a burden, so they decided to remain a duo and prepare their weapons. Izuku and Shoko went to Snipe's tent to choose weapons. Izuku said he intended to take a sniper rifle. Shoko worried it might take too long to set up. Izuku explained that the barrel could be attached only when needed. Izuku asked Todoroki which weapon he would choose, and when Todoroki was unsure, Izuku handed him a support gun identified as a Rainmetal MG. Izuku selected a revolver as a reliable short-range sidearm and spun its cylinder with a satisfied click. Snipe remarked that the choices were solid and provided magazines and additional pellets, along with a holster. Izuku chose binoculars and walkie-talkies as support items, and Todoroki agreed to the plan, trusting Izuku's experience. Snipe instructed them to go to Entrance B, explaining that groups would be routed through different entrances to avoid immediate confrontation. The event was set to start in 2 minutes. Izuku used the time to explain his plan in detail to Shoko. Shoko expressed concern about the risk, but agreed to follow the plan. Midnight counted down and then signaled the start. The field had been transformed to resemble a dense jungle. The students struggled to process how the stadium had been changed so quickly. Inside the course, a team encountered them almost immediately and opened fire, but Izuku and Todoroki held their positions. Todoroki admitted his discomfort with the situation, and Izuku said it was better to stick to the plan. The opposing team managed to hit all of Izuku and Todoroki's targets and took all their points before they had a chance to move. The victorious team celebrated as they retreated. Present Mike reported to the audience that Midoriya and Todoroki had lost their lead in an unexpected moment and that Minoma's team had taken all their points in the first minute. Aizawa suggested that Midoriya and Todoroki might have done this on purpose as part of a larger plan. Snipe warned that while such tactics could work in the contest, they could be dangerous in a real battlefield. Midoriya thought it was clever what the others had done. Snipe had even called the idea clever, and the team agreed that they knew the next step. Todoroki confirmed that they should act, and the team began searching for a small tower where they could hide. One teammate reported a tower at 104 degrees. Izuku turned and saw the little tower. He said it was perfect and the team ran to it. From the tower they could see the entire field. Midoriya asked Todoroki for the binoculars and told him to take one of the walkie-talkies. Todoroki nodded and complied. A teammate asked to be called Shoko, and Midoriya asked to be called Izuku. Midoriya scanned the field to identify other students and recalled every detail he could about their equipment. Most teams carried rifles. Bakugo had chosen a bazooka, which would be powerful but heavy. Achiko had a rifle and Tsu carried a revolver. They appeared to be working together. Midoriya moved on to the next team, Kirishima, Kaminari, and Mina, where Kirishima and Kaminari had rifles and Mina carried a pistol. He checked the other teams as well, but their reconnaissance was interrupted by Midnight's announcement that the first part of the exercise had finished and 30 minutes remained. Shoko reacted with surprise at the short time left. Midnight indicated she had other intentions. Most teams were already tired, so they should move now. Midoriya confirmed he had the information he needed and Shoko nodded. Present Mike announced the standings. Minoma's team in first place, Shinsu's team next, then Bakugo's, followed by Kirishima's. Midoriya said it was time to start hunting. He explained that he had a sniper rifle, intended to take down targets with precision. He asked Shoko to watch his back while he focused on shooting. Greed volunteered to warn them if any participants escaped their view but cautioned that he might be too late to react. Midoriya trusted Greed to help with surveillance. He would concentrate on shooting. Midoriya concentrated, letting his training with all might sharpen his perception. His view widened. He set up the sniper rifle, lay down, and identified the targets he wanted. After checking the wind and confirming distances, he fired 3 careful shots. Each shot hit the 3 targets of a distant participant, and the team's bracelet display rose to 1,478 points. Shoko expressed surprise at the rapid gain, and Midoriya attributed it to experience. Over the next 10 minutes their score climbed to 12,890 and they moved into third place. Greed alerted them to a person at 270 degrees. As the person entered a room and prepared to shoot, Midoriya fired 3 small projectiles in that direction without breaking his focus on the sniper rifle. The projectiles hit the targets, and their points transferred to Midoriya's team. Shoko noticed Midoriya holding his revolver toward Kaminari while remaining focused on the sniper. Midoriya ordered a quick escape, grabbed Shoko's hand, and they sprinted away. Their bracelet now showed 22,452 points. Present Mike then announced that Midoriya's team had moved into second place. Midoriya released Shoko's hand and guessed that Kaminari's time had just expired. Kaminari fired in their direction and grazing hits struck some of Shoko's targets. Midoriya dodged several shots. One projectile flew toward Shoko, but she created an ice wall in time to block it. Midoriya took Shoko's hand in a quick, team-focused motion and they jumped away, landing about 30 meters further. He let her go and noted the loss of 100 points from that exchange. Midnight reminded them that 10 minutes remained. They ran to find cover and encountered Minoma's team, which had already noticed them and opened fire. Midoriya evaded the incoming shots with a backflip. He fired a projectile but the enemy dodged. Shoko fired and struck 2 of Minoma's targets. Midoriya attempted to hit the third but his shot struck an ice wall instead. Minoma revealed that he could copy quirks by touching a user, which explained why a quirk they expected did not activate. He taunted Class 1A, fired more shots, and tried to disrupt their rhythm. Midoriya recognized a lapse in Minoma's concentration and wanted to take advantage, but he found himself out of ammunition. The countdown began. Present Mike called out the time as it ran down. Cozy Eye fired at Midoriya, who dodged and accidentally sent his empty loader spinning into the air. As the countdown approached 3, Cozy Eye shouted that he had an opening. Midoriya acted quickly. He let the empty loader fall and positioned his revolver with the barrel pointed toward the ground, ready for whatever the next moment would bring. The loader fell into the air chamber of the gun, and Izuku slammed the bottom of the weapon against his arm to lock it. He fired 3 projectiles at Cozy Eye, and they struck their targets. Present Mike announced that the score had changed dramatically in the last 10 seconds and that only 2 seconds remained. Minoma shouted that they needed to get the points back. Bakugu said it was too late. Midnight declared time up and read the top 6 teams. Tokoyami in 6th, Ida in 5th, Kirishima in 4th, Shinso in 3rd, Bakugu in 2nd, and Team Midoriya in 1st. Bakugu gloated that his plan had worked, and the others grumbled in response. Present Mike called for a 1-hour lunch break and invited everyone to meet back later. Aizawa said he was going to take a nap. Mina praised Izuku, telling him his performance had been amazing, and Shoko credited Izuku's plan for their rise. Izuku explained that the plan had been to sacrifice points briefly so they could observe other participants without being harassed. Kaminari remarked that if they still had full points people would chase them and they would have no time to scout. Kirishima teased Kaminari for once saying something intelligent. Izuku suggested they get food before the dining hall became crowded, and everyone agreed. After lunch, Mineta and Kaminari whispered about the cheerleading squads. Mineta made an inappropriate suggestion, but the others quickly intervened and the awkward moment passed. Izuku scolded Mineta for his behavior, grabbed him by the head, and tossed him into a trash can where he stayed until they were ready to leave. The group then rejoined the others without further incident. Present Mike returned from the break and explained that the 16 members of the 6 winning teams would participate in a formal one-on-one tournament. He said the matchups would be decided by lot, then the festivities and the tournament would follow. The finalists could choose to participate in the festivities or rest and save their strength. Present Mike announced the matchups: Midoriya Izuku vs Uraraka Ochako, Ida Tenya vs Hatsum Mei, Shizaki vs Kaminari Denki, Todoroki Shoko vs Siro Hanta, Ashido Mina vs Aoyama Yuga, Tokoyami Fumikage vs Yayaro Zumomo, Tetsutetsu vs Kirishima Ijiro, and Shinso Hitoshi vs Bakugu Katsumi. Ochako became distressed when she learned her first match was against Izuku and admitted that he was the worst opponent she could face. Siro reminded her she could forfeit, but Ochako refused, insisting she had come to prove herself and would not let Izuku beat her in seconds. Izuku assured her that he had never called her weak and that he believed she was strong. Ochako became emotional and cried, overwhelmed that the number 1 student thought highly of her. The classmates agreed that anyone would be happy to hear such praise, and Izuku protested that he was not that strong, prompting puzzled looks from the rest of the class. They all quickly dismissed the awkwardness and focused on the upcoming matches. Present Mike hyped the crowd and introduced the first match, reminding everyone that Izuku was competing despite not having displayed a quirk earlier. He then laid out the rules. Victory would be achieved by knocking an opponent out of the ring, immobilizing them, or forcing a concession. Medical staff would be on standby, and while contestants could use any tactics within the rules, going for lethal force would result in disqualification because a true hero never aims to kill. The competitors prepared to begin. Present Mike announced the start of the match. Izuku set greed on the ground and Uraraka rushed toward him. Uraraka attempted to touch him multiple times, but Izuku kept dodging. A classmate scolded Ochako that this was not what she had been taught, and Uraraka replied that she would show them. Uraraka managed to grab Izuku's arm and hoisted him over her shoulder. Izuku flipped to his feet and landed a strong blow to her midsection, sending her tumbling and cracking the arena floor. Dust and smoke filled the air. Uraraka plunged into the smoke to attack. She located Izuku, grabbed his arm and his collar, and tugged him down. Izuku seized her arm, used it to flip her over, and slammed her back onto the ground, cracking the floor again. Ochako coughed, winded, and wiped at her mouth. Izuku noted that her moves were well executed but would not be enough against someone trained in martial arts. Ochako attempted to make him float, but Izuku anticipated it and broke free. He picked up greed, creating an opening that allowed Ochako to reach him. Uraraka tried to claim victory, but Izuku questioned whether she was certain. Ochako pointed out that his weight should exceed her limit. Izuku indicated that greed was much heavier, then urged her to give up, telling her he did not want to hurt her and that she could not win against him. Uraraka concentrated and lifted many chunks of rock into the air. Izuku recognized the setup and Uraraka released the rocks. Greed transformed into a massive pistol. Izuku focused his energy into the weapon, aimed at the sky, and fired a powerful beam of ki that shattered all the floating rocks. The blast sent Ochako flying out of the ring. Present Mike announced that everything had happened in an instant, declared Izuku Midoriya the winner of the match without injury, praised the fight, and called for a 5-minute wait until the next bout. After the break, Present Mike announced the next match and the competitors. Midnight pointed out that those were support items and normally forbidden for Hero Core students, requiring a special request. May explained that she had not expected an issue and had accepted her opponent's offer to borrow the items out of respect. Ida stated that he had applied for an exception, moved by his opponent's sportsmanship. Aizawa agreed that if both parties were willing, the use of the items could be allowed. Present Mike declared the second match started. Ida ran toward May. Mike commented that May's speed was incredible, then noted the presence of a microphone. May explained proudly that her custom leg parts made her movements feel light and that her hydraulic attachment bars helped with dodging as she kept pace with Ida. Ida wondered where the support company was seated as May demonstrated auto-balancing and deft maneuvering. Aizawa observed that she was a natural salesperson. The exchange continued like a play-by-play sales pitch for another 10 minutes until May declared that there was nothing left to show and walked out of the ring. Midnight announced that Hatsum was out and Ida would move on to the second round. Ida apologized for feeling used and expressed his dislike. Later, the match between Kaminari Denki from Class 1A and Shiozaki from Class 1B began. Kaminari suggested grabbing something to eat afterward and offered to console his opponent, confident the match would be over quickly. The match ended almost instantly, with Kaminari immobilized by Shiozaki. Aizawa remarked that Kaminari had short-circuited after one attack. The next match started between Shiro Hanta and Todoroki Shoko. Shiro admitted he did not feel strongly about winning or losing and launched his tape at Shoko. Commentators described his tactic as a surprise attempt to push her out of the ring. Shoko apologized and used a quirk that froze half the stadium, which Shiro conceded was overkill. Midnight noted that Shiro was immobilized and the crowd acknowledged the effort. Shoko apologized for overdoing her response and explained she had been annoyed. In the infirmary, Izuku checked on Ochako, and she asked why he was there instead of watching the other matches. Izuku explained that the other matches had already ended and recounted the quick outcomes. Ashido had damaged Aoyama's belt, leading to a quick knockout after Aoyama panicked, and Yokoyami had defeated his opponent before Momo could use her creations. Ochako noted that Izuku was one of the strongest in one-on-one matches. Back in the ring, the matchup between Kirishima Eijiro and Tetsu continued for 20 minutes until both fighters collapsed simultaneously. The commentators called it a mirror quirk matchup and described it as a straight-up exchange of blows. Both were down, but Kirishima managed to rise first, and the announcer declared Kirishima the winner. For the last matchup of the first round, the commentators introduced Katsumi Bakugu versus the mysterious Hitoshi Shinso. Shinso offered good luck, but Bakugu did not respond. Shinso commented on being unable to enter certain opportunities because of his quirk and expressed resentment about others being born with more advantageous quirks. Bakugu snapped that he wanted Shinso to be quiet, then stepped into the ring and confronted him. Bakugu told Shinso sharply that he was not the only one who suffered and that many people worked hard to achieve their dreams regardless of their quirks. He urged Shinso to stop blaming his quirk and to start working toward his goals. Bakugu then struck Shinso and pushed him out of the ring. The commentators reacted with surprise at Bakugu's unexpected motivational approach. Midnight declared Bakugo the winner. Bakugo suggested that Shinso speak to Izuku if he wanted someone who understood his situation. Present Mike announced that the first round was over and that the competition would resume after a short break. Present Mike announced that the break was over and called the next battle, Midoriya vs. Ida. Tenya Ida sprinted toward Izuku and launched a kick, but Izuku dodged. Ida struck again. Izuku evaded once more. Ida said he would go full speed, then accelerated wildly and circled Izuku at top speed. When he kicked, Izuku caught his foot and threw him out of the ring. Ida slammed into the wall, leaving a noticeable dent. Midnight declared Midoriya the winner. In the infirmary, Ochako Uraraka praised Izuku for his performance and asked how he had kept up with Ida. Izuku said it had been instinct. They exchanged light-hearted remarks and Ochako reminded him that his next opponent would be one of the other competitors. Present Mike then called Shizuki vs. Todoroki. Izuku moved to watch, but the match had already progressed. Shizuki stood frozen and unable to act. Present Mike moved on to announce Ishido vs. Tokoyami, and later Tokoyami emerged victorious. The next match, Kirishima vs. Bakugo, began. Katsumi used explosive attacks, but Kirishima's hardened skin held against most of them. After relentless strikes, Katsumi finally landed several rapid blows that overwhelmed him, and Kirishima fell unconscious. Present Mike announced Bakugo's win. At last it was Midoriya vs. Todoroki. Izuku and Todoroki exchanged brief good luck wishes. Todoroki appeared embarrassed and blushed when Izuku mentioned it. Todoroki immediately froze a large section of the stadium with her ice, declaring that she could not afford to lose. Izuku countered by breaking through the frozen layers, restoring movement and continuing the fight. Present Mike admired the show of power as the matchup continued. Todoroki tried again with more ice, but Izuku shattered the formations each time. When Izuku questioned why Todoroki still hadn't used her fire, she said she would do what she chose. She then placed a hand on the ground and formed a giant ice bear that charged him. Izuku dodged its attacks, leapt up, and struck the creature on the head. The bear's slap pushed him, but he recovered, gathered his strength, and finally broke it apart. Todoroki produced an ice launcher and fired at Izuku. He evaded and appeared behind her, delivering a blow that sent her stumbling and coughing as she fought to stay upright. He struck her again on the back, and she landed heavily. The two traded terse, determined words about underestimating each other and whether to use their full power. Todoroki insisted she would not rely on another person's strength. Izuku, speaking with fierce conviction, told her that her power belonged to her and that she could be whatever hero she wanted to be. That speech prompted Todoroki to hesitate, then to breathe out flames. Todoroki admitted she wanted to be a hero too and unleashed her fire toward Izuku. One of the announcers noted that it had been a clever move. Izuku decided to respond at a moderated level, calling up 30% of his power. He called to greed, and the dragon motif on his chest moved down his arm to connect. Pain pulsed through him, but he did not cry out. He steeled himself and readied his transformation. Greed's voice was heard announcing that he was loaded, and Izuku materialized a large sword. He swung, releasing a blazing slash that carried fire. Midnight called for Cementos to act. Cementos used his quirk to erect thick barriers to shield Todoroki, but Izuku's fiery slash cut through the defenses. The attack struck past the walls and hit Todoroki, leaving her gravely wounded and collapsing to the ground without any graphic detail. Midnight murmured that Midoriya had won and then announced it loudly. Izuku rushed forward, panic flooding him. He lifted Todoroki and carried her in his arms to the infirmary. In the infirmary, Recovery Girl reprimanded Izuku for fighting so fiercely and warned that Todoroki needed immediate medical attention and an operation. Izuku apologized, distraught. Recovery Girl assured him that Todoroki would be all right and told him to go watch the next match, which was Tokoyami vs. Bakugo. Izuku returned to his seat and arrived in time to see the match in progress. Katsumi launched an explosion at Dark Shadow's head, and the shadow struggled to withstand the blast. Tokoyami observed the chaos with concern as the announcers described Bakugo as unstoppable and Tokoyami as forced onto the defensive. The crowd and commentators wondered if they had missed something in Tokoyami's recent series of wins as the match continued. Ochako noted that the light from those explosions was keeping him at bay and that it was a bad matchup for him. Izuku observed that he could still turn it around if Kaken did not figure out his secret weakness. Tokoyami realized he had underestimated her. There was no time to recharge Dark Shadow's power, and if it ran out it would be over. He suspected she was trying to tire him out and found her more clever than he had given her credit for. Katsumi jumped and attempted to strike Tokoyami with an explosion, but Dark Shadow defended him. Tokoyami ordered Dark Shadow to grab her, but Katsumi dodged and flew over him. She prepared to attack his back, but Dark Shadow shielded him. Katsumi called a stun grenade and released a bright explosion. The commentator Mike complained about the dust clouds and wondered what had happened down there. Tokoyami acknowledged that his opponent had anticipated his weakness, and Katsumi smiled as she held Tokoyami down with one hand while charging another explosion with the other. Tokoyami surrendered, and Midnight declared that Tokoyami had conceded and Bakugo had won. Mike announced that the final match would be Midoriya versus Bakugo. Ochako felt sorry for Tokoyami, and Siro admitted he had expected Tokoyami to pull it off. Kaminari remarked that Tokoyami was not invincible after all. Kirishima whispered that a weakness to light made sense, and that someone like Bakugo would be likely to exploit it. Ida told the group to observe and learn, and they prepared to watch the finals. As they gathered, Tenya's phone buzzed. He saw that his mother was calling and answered, apologizing for losing. His mother interrupted to say that the call was about his brother Tensei. A villain had taken him. The announcer built the tension for the final. Katsumi taunted that anyone who hid her true strength might look weak and insisted that, though Izuku might be strong, he could not defeat her. The match began. Katsumi dashed at Izuku and used her explosions, but Izuku dodged. She vanished from sight and then reappeared with her hand 3 centimeters from Izuku's head. She detonated an explosion in his face. Smoke filled the ring, and when it cleared, Izuku emerged with a small burn on his cheek. Tokoyami could not let Izuku think he had the advantage, and Katsumi attacked again. Izuku jumped back. Katsumi rolled and used her quirk to boost her speed like an explosive rolling rock. She closed the distance faster than Izuku could land and tried to strike his hand. Izuku attempted a kick but found no opponent in front of him and realized she had used explosions to get behind him. Katsumi attacked and punched him in the stomach, sending him sliding across the ground until he stopped himself with a hand on the surface. Katsumi taunted that she was only warming up and then blinded him with an explosion she called a stun grenade. Izuku front flipped to dodge and countered with a kick that she blocked with her arms. She used explosions to appear behind him and struck again. Both were thrown several meters by the blast. Izuku decided to get serious. He closed his eyes to concentrate on his surroundings, and a subtle aura spread around him. Katsumi shouted that there was no time to close his eyes and lunged to grab him, but Izuku leapt and grabbed her arm instead. He threw her out of the ring, but before she could hit the ground she used her quirk to fly back to him. Katsumi said she had worked up a sweat and spun, using her explosions to create a whirlwind of blasts. She prepared a powerful technique she named Howitzer Impact and declared she was ready at 40% charge. Izuku realized that such a strike would leave him drained, but he steeled himself anyway. Katsumi launched the attack and struck Izuku directly. The commentator Mike screamed that Bakugo had demonstrated massive firepower and that everyone would know what had happened after the smoke cleared. When the smoke did clear, Izuku stood unhurt, protected behind a shield as tall as he was. The commentators marveled that he appeared unscathed. Katsumi muttered in frustration and unleashed a barrage of mini-explosive lasers she called an armor-piercing autocannon. Izuku dodged by moving only his head and then seized his chance. He ran at Katsumi and landed a punch in her stomach that sent her flying. She steadied herself using her explosions and rushed back in, preparing to strike. Izuku ready to counter, but Katsumi used her quirk to appear behind him and attempted another punch. Izuku bent down at the last moment to avoid it. Katsumi toppled onto him. Izuku seized the opening and struck her waist. She crashed hard to the ground. Katsumi admitted that his punches were stronger than she had expected and that she could not beat him without taking risks. She then leapt again and unleashed howitzer impact at full power, creating a massive explosion that surged toward Izuku. Katsumi declared that it was her win. Izuku quietly questioned her claim, then shot out of the blast and delivered a punch that sent Katsumi to the ground, making the earth shudder. The smoke billowed and the crowd called out in confusion, unable to see. As the haze thinned, two figures and a large, deep crater came into view. Izuku stood over an unconscious Katsumi with his fist mere centimeters from her face. He was surprised to realize he had not touched her. He noticed his arm had briefly looked like a dragon's and asked Greed if he had done that. Greed shook his head in equal surprise. The arm soon returned to normal. Midnight announced that Katsumi was out of bounds and declared Midoriya Izuku of Class A the winner of the first-year sports festival. The ceremony continued with the awards. Midnight named Todoroki and Tokoyami as joint third place, Bakugo as second, and Midoriya as first. All Might stepped forward to present the medals. He praised Tokoyami for his strength and handed him a medal, advising him that relying solely on his quirk would not be enough against bad matchups and encouraging him to hone his innate strength. Tokoyami accepted the advice with respect. All Might then addressed Todoroki, congratulating him and noting the change in his use of fire. Todoroki acknowledged that embracing that part of himself would not be simple and that there were unresolved matters he still needed to face. All Might encouraged him quietly, expressing confidence that Todoroki could do what he needed to. All Might turned to Bakugo and, observing his calm demeanor, remarked that he had expected a different reaction. Bakugo accepted his defeat and said he would learn from his mistakes. From nearby, Katsumi loudly asserted her identity. One spectator joked about Bakugo being fake, but then recognized the truth when Katsumi's unique expression confirmed who she was. Someone leaned in and quietly told Bakugo that if he learned from his mistakes, he could become one of the best heroes despite his personality, and Bakugo reacted defensively. All Might, realizing the tension, hurried over to Izuku and warmly congratulated him for his performance in the events, calling him a fine young student. Todoroki's inner self felt a quiet confirmation of what he had suspected. All Might closed the ceremony by reminding everyone that each participant had the potential to stand where the winners were standing. He spoke about competition, encouragement, and pushing one another to grow, urging the students to think of themselves as the seeds that would become the heroes of tomorrow. He then led the crowd in one final cheer of gratitude for everyone's hard work, and the hall responded with a resounding affirmation. Time passed. In the hospital, a brother rushed in and clasped a relative's hand, overcome by emotion. He apologized, admitting that although the younger sibling had looked up to him, he had felt he had failed. It was a painful but honest moment. The next day, in the Todoroki household, Fuyumi wondered aloud why Shoto had gone to the hospital without informing their father. Their questions reflected the family's worry and the suddenness of the visit. At the hospital, Todoroki reflected inwardly that his presence had once pushed someone away, which had kept him from visiting before. Now, even if that person did not ask for help, he resolved that he would do what he could to protect and save them. Back at the Midoriya household, his mother celebrated that he had fainted 7 times since the second event, beaming with pride over his accomplishments. She joked about grandchildren and teased that her son was becoming a strong young man. Midoriya protested, embarrassed but touched by her pride. 2 days later on a train, people noticed Midoriya from the hero course. Several commuters complimented him on his performance at the sports festival, praising his final punch that had upended the ring. Fans asked for autographs and took turns telling him how much they admired him and how certain they were that he would become a great hero. Midoriya humbly obliged, letting them have a moment of excitement as he signed papers and posed for quick photos. The festival had ended, medals had been awarded, and the students dispersed, each carrying lessons learned, injuries healed in time, and the determination to grow stronger. The day's events left a clear sense that these young heroes were only at the beginning of their journeys.